Okay, am I live right now? I don't think I am. It says maybe I am live. Why, what do you know? I am live. Okay, am I live right now? Okay, cool. My goodness. All right. All right. So I'm going to take a look at these. Let me get live here on TikTok. Okay, that works good. Education. Okay, we're live on TikTok now. Okay, we're going to start recording here. Off a little gentler. Okay, here's Paige Lale. She's on TikTok and she is also on YouTube. She's a young creator. She comes up with a lot of good stuff. Let's hear what she has to say.
Okay, buckle in. We're getting into her. Hi, friends. If you do not know who I am, my name is Paige Leal. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm autistic, and over here we talk about autism and stuff. The stuff today being sex. I think that sexual
Uh oh.
education should be something that happens throughout the lifetime, but I do think that it needs to be tailored to the individual child and also progress throughout that child's lifetime to become more specific and more tailored to them and their development and where they are at that development. So, but with that being said, I am going to be talking about actual like sexual intimacy. I'm not gonna be like talking sexually. It is kind of gonna be more like just like my opinion stuff. I kind of
Okay.
wanted to say that this is for 18 plus, but I'm like, it's not
Let me know
porn.
if
Like
there's
I'm
too much
talking about
background on
stuff
this
that I
mic.
learned when I was in public school. So I guess like just be smart. I really wanted to talk about my relationship with sex and like having sex now as an autistic person and some of the struggles that I have and some of the ways that, things.
So yeah, this is liable to be very, very different for her and I. Obviously, I'm much older, and being male is going to have a big difference on it too.
But I realize that my relationship with my sexual health has been very complex and is still under development. And so I can't really talk about it without giving kind of a backstory. Because I think that the way that I grew up, the way that I learned about sex really impacted how I ended up having sex and also being autistic and the way that I was taught about
For me, it was I was grew up in the South in the '70s, and um, it was extremely fundamentalist and so forth. So there was no sex talked about or anything. It was really it was bad. Sex was bad. I never could figure out how like having kids was supposed to be so great when sex was so bad. Like you guys had to have sex to do that. It was like I was, I kind of thought of it in that terms, but um, in some respects. But then I realized it was kind of ridiculous. And once I got in the military and so forth, and saw how life really was, I was like, yeah, okay, this is definitely all ridiculous.
relationships really impacted my relationship with sex as well. So we're starting back when I was like 2 or 3. I knew what sex was. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that sex was something special, something secretive, something that kids weren't supposed to know about, that only adults did behind closed doors, and it was very, very hush hush. One time my mom
Shame.
spelled sex thinking I didn't know what it spelled. I'm like, I know that spells sex. Like, I know. Unfortunately, growing up, I heard or saw or walked in on.
Yeah, so she couldn't even hear the word sex. Like come on. And yeah, it was pretty similar for me too. Now my kids, well, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. They were farm kids. They knew about sex. And, I mean, my daughter was, I think she bred her first mare when she was 5. Totally not kidding.
My parents having sex a lot, but they never explained it. They never talked to me about it. They never told me what was going on. But it really bothered me. I was frustrated because I knew that kids weren't supposed to know about this or hear it or see it, and they were not being very careful or considerate or respectful, and that made me really angry as a kid too, especially when my little brother came along and then my little brother had to like hear it. I felt pretty emotionally
So they were being shamed. I think she grew up as a Mormon.
neglected by my parents as a kid. And so I've really found that I thought that when they were having sex and stuff, I found it really selfish, honestly. And I get frustrated with them and mad at them because they never wanted to hang out with me. They were always busy or they never had the time. But it could be the middle of the night and they'd make time to do this thing together. And I'm like, ugh, it just makes me so mad because it feels selfish to me that you do this, but you don't want to hang out with me. You don't make any time for me. Anyway, had to keep it very hush hush. One time I told a teacher
I always made time for my kids. I didn't give a shit. That was number one.
about it at school, and she called my mom, and my mom said, "Don't talk to people about it." And I said, "No, I can do what I want if it's the truth. Maybe you should stop having sex in front of me."
Look at that house she's in. There's an old door. Look at that. That's a skeleton key. So we're talking 50s, 40s, 30s. I'm thinking probably 40s, 30s or before, maybe 20s. That's an old door. It's just been painted over. That's all brass, I bet. And the handle is probably brass. I'm guessing that's kind of cool.
Me if
Has
you have a
nothing to do with
problem. But
what
I
we're looking
had
at.
zero sex talk from my parents at all growing up, which was super fun when I started to hit puberty. The only thing that I knew about sex and about puberty was from whatever they teach you in the public education, which is what? Literally the anatomy of your body parts.
And she probably, I don't know where she grew up, but I think she was Mormon, and I think she grew up in a Mormon area. So those schools are not going to teach anything that is outside the doctrine of Mormonism.
No lad just needs to know the vas deferens. Like, is this surgery school or am I a 12-year-old kid? I knew nothing about sex or how it worked or how sexual arousal worked or anything about masturbation. And around like 11, 12 was when, started masturbating. Didn't know I was
Mm-hmm.
masturbating. Didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was that it would feel good and then it would build up to feeling really, really, really good, but I couldn't do it anymore after that or else it would hurt. And so there was a stopping point. I felt
Mm-hmm.
so much shame and guilt for years
I have no idea why it would hurt, but I imagine it has something to do with being a female or something.
after I started masturbating. I did it in private in my room because apparently, I was like 3 and touched myself in public. And my mom said, "Do not do that, to go to your room." And so I knew that at least I had to go to my room. I was filled with so much shame and so much guilt that I wanted to end my life when I was 11. Like, I
Yeah, my daughter was about the same, and she got guilted and shamed. Her mom told her she was a lesbian at 12, and that fucked her up. Like, I mean, to this day, it still kind of messes it. She knows. I mean, she's grown through all that. She doesn't care, but at the time, she just thought it was just horrible and all this because she didn't even know what it was. It was just this horrible thing that her mother was told her she was.
I wrote a suicide note about what I was doing and how much of a bad person I felt like I was. And I showed it to my mom one day, and my mom was like, okay, this is a lot. You're overreacting. You learn nothing about any of that shit in sex ed. You learn nothing about pleasure.
Isn't that sad? Like, because of sexuality, this poor kid literally was thinking about suicide because she didn't know about sexuality. That is so sad. Oh, that hurts.
Like, literally, all you learn is anatomy, every STI known to fucking man, so they can terrify the shit out of you. And then also all of the ways that you can prevent pregnancy, because they also want to terrify the shit out of you. I was like, how does the stuff come out of the penis?
At Health Carousel, we help you read
Isn't that terrible? Oh my goodness. Yes, we have to deal with ads, unfortunately. I don't do this for a living, so I can't pay for this stuff to be gotten rid of. And I am doing this just live, so whatever happens to show up there shows up. Okay.
Comes out, or like, is there a start stop? Like, how does it stop? When does it start? How does it go in? How does it work? What position does it go? Like, what are the biomechanics?
See, this is really sad. Now, I don't think she was a farm girl like my daughter was, and my son. I mean, they bred so many different animals. They could tell you about their estrus cycles and everything else. So yeah, they could figure it out.
Of it? How does, like, do you move? Is it supposed
And of course, I'm sure there was enough dang porn and stuff. I know they watched porn, at least a little bit of it. And not that it's the best educational thing, but they knew everything they really needed to know. Just from being farm kids. Oh crap! Ah, how did I do that? I opened up another one. Where is she? We'll find her.
Hello everyone,
Oh,
my name's John and this is a video about autism.
we don't care. There you are. There's Paige.
to, like, how do you, what is it, what's the do, how do you do it? Can we talk about a woman's pleasure? Because I can't even see myself in this black and white diagram from the 30s. Like, that doesn't even look like my vagina. Can we talk about, like, having a safe partner and safe sex? Not just, like, wear a condom and don't get pregnant, but safe as in, like, this is a good situation and you want to do this and
Emotionally safe, right? Yeah, exactly like she said. Like you want to do this, you're comfortable with this, whatever. It's the right time, and age on that can vary a lot. Obviously, we're talking about adulthood and so forth here, not talking about children, but even so, with adults, that can still they can be longer than others. And just because someone turns 18 doesn't mean they're necessarily ready for that, and they shouldn't be expected to be. If it's not right for them, it's not right for them. It's just how it is.
you both have consent to do this and you are ready and you want to do this and this is a good person. Like, how do I know that someone is not taking advantage of me? How do I know?
See, just because we're autistic doesn't mean we don't have common sense here. I mean, this is really important stuff. What Paige is talking about here, really important stuff for anyone. And I don't care who you are.
When I want to have sex? How do I advocate for myself if I don't want to have sex and someone does? What about having a relationship with your body and understanding
And can you say no at any time? And it be no. It better be.
your body and knowing your body boundaries? We need to be educated
And does the person you know your boundaries? Your hard limits, your soft limits, whatever you want to call it.
on porn, or else porn becomes education. Because if you don't teach all this shit about sex, kids need to learn about sex. Everyone needs to learn about sex if they have a human body. Because I knew nothing. So I learned from good old porn. Which, what do little girls learn from porn? They learn, well, that you're ugly, that you are an object to be constantly desired. You are being perceived, you're being judged, you need to look and act and be away. I was like, all right, roger that. I see it. As a little autistic kid, I'm like, I'm gonna mask the shit out of that. So then I'm 15. I get my first boyfriend. We're together for like 6 months. When we finally decided to do it, we had known each other forever, and it was both of our first times, so it was like a really big deal. I was with him for a year after, we became sexually active, and during that year, okay, I'm not just gonna single him out here. It was a lot of years after I became sexually active that sex was never fun for me. I never wanted to have sex when my partner did. I'm gonna talk about specifically having sex with men because this problem was when I had sex with men. Having sex with women was like completely different because I didn't know I was gay and it was all like, so I really feel this way with men specifically. And at this point, I was primarily with men. So I was.
And yeah, see, I was definitely all with women. I was uh, that's what I was taught. You were. Um, it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that I basically asked myself, well, okay, why am I heterosexual? And the only reason that I could think of that I was actually homo or heterosexual was because that's what the church had taught me. That was what culture had taught me. And I I still like in relationships or whatever. I still prefer female, but I there's nothing wrong with men either. I don't. It's not about that. It's kind of different. But anyway,
Was constantly aware that I was being perceived, and also very, very aware that men thought I was hot, and that boys, actually, it was boys mostly. Very aware that they're judging me, that they are perceiving me. I never had an orgasm, and actually,
that's not uncommon at all. Not uncommon at all. And a lot of that is, again, is this probably in her case because she was made to feel so uncomfortable that it was actually hard to enjoy herself because she felt guilty probably. And I'm not trying to lay this out here on her, but that's a very, very common thing coming from this extreme religious background. It's very, very common. And I mean, it was the case for me to a large extent too. I never did. It took a long time before I enjoyed it like I could. Um, because of that. I mean, like I said, I was even 40, in my late 40s. I was still trying to figure that crap out. Probably still am.
okay, we're gonna trigger warning right here for sexual assault, okay? Because this is one of the things that we really gotta talk about, especially when it comes to autistic girls and their sexual health. I didn't consent to a lot, to most things. It would just kind of start happening, and I'm like, oh, how
Howdy, I don't know.
the fuck did I get myself in this situation? I guess I must have done something to deserve this. I must have signaled in some kind of way that this was okay. I must have. I don't know. I don't know a lot of things about people, so it must have happened. And I would dissociate. And it was when I was coming back, I'm like, what the I just dissociated whilst having sex? Like, I'm still currently having sex. But I was gone for I don't know how long, I don't know where.
That's interesting. Um, that almost sounds like an essay. That is like yeah. Well, that's what she said. Yeah, it definitely, yeah, that's not good. Now with adult sensory play or whatever, you can lose track of time also, but that's done intentionally. This is definitely is not cool at all. What she's talking about.
Why did that happen? I was really young and naive, and I put myself in a lot of dangerous situations with people that I thought that I trusted that I shouldn't have trusted. It wasn't until I broke up with like my long-term boyfriend of like 2.5 years that I'm like, most of the times that I've had sex in my life have been actually without my consent and without my enjoyment or participation. I thought I was a lesbian for a bit because I'm like, it's never happened with men before. Like I've enjoyed myself with women, but I do like men. I realize now. I actually do. It's just I really didn't like my ex-boyfriend. And now knowing about PDA autism too, I really don't like the way that I think men specifically get to look at me. You know, I have PDA problems when I think a man is like sexually aroused.
See, okay, with me, I'm a PDA autistic or whatever, and I didn't ever look at girls like, even if they were freaking hot. It did not matter how hot they were. I didn't look at them the same way as guys, like I mean, as other guys, and that worked very much to my advantage because I ended up enjoying their company a lot of times, a lot more than other guys, and it was because I wasn't that predatory type person. I wasn't. I still was a man, and I still was found them attractive, but I didn't connect with it in that kind of way. I didn't. I wasn't like after them like prey or whatever. I was there, and if they were interested in talking to me, then cool. And then I was very, very interested in who and what they were, what made them tick as a person. And I mean, eventually, yes, I probably got to have fun with them, like some guys wanted to, but that was just what happened. It wasn't necessarily the goal. I don't know.
By me or attracted by me when I'm not trying to get that, when I'm just existing as a person, like, and
See, she was just existing as a person. So If they would have just freaking left her alone, then she'd probably be like, "Hey, damn, this guy's kind of cool," but, because she didn't feel like objectified in that way. I definitely see that.
And then you get sexually attracted to me, I'm like, okay, that's your fucking deal, not mine. Like, don't come over here and try to like make me sexually aroused because you are. Like, when I
Mm-hmm.
was younger, I would just like literally dissociate and just become a zombie, I guess, and just let things happen. But now,
Mm-mm.
thankfully, since being like about 21, I've really taken a look at my sexual health and prioritized it and prioritized my own consent when I am ready and willing to have sex. This is
Good.
actually turns out going to be a part two. This is all my
Very good.
past. I'll see you in the next bit for all my current sexual stuff. This is the end of the video song. This video is to tell you the video's done. If you hear it.
Oh boy. Okay. Um, we don't really want to talk. Uh, yeah. Let's go with this gal here. Um, I do not know her.
Lupine, welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. I was not planning on filming today. I thought I was gonna sit back and relax and play some Animal Crossing, but the internet had different plans for me because I was up reading YouTube comments, and 99.5% of them are great. I think we have an amazing community here on YouTube of people sharing their experiences and their stories and polite disagreements, but every once in a while, you get somebody who just says something
So I was just looking. This is done 3 years ago.
and my brain cannot let it go. It could not. And this person attempted to insult me by suggesting that my partner looked like he had autism and that he shouldn't be part of the BDSM community. And I know that this is probably
Well, I am autistic and am. Oops. And yeah, that's probably fairly common, by the way.
probably a troll comment, and I know that I shouldn't really give it the time of day, which is why I'm not like putting the person's username on the screen or whatever, because I think that would be giving them attention, and I just like deleted the comment as soon as I read it. But the idea still stuck with me because it was more than a troll comment. It also, I think, hinted at a thought pattern that a lot of people do have, and it hints at an actual problem I think we do have in the larger world, in the BDSM community, of bias against people who are neurodiverse. And that is what I want to talk about in this video. So at first, I should probably define some terms I'm going to be using. When I use the term neurodiverse, what I am referring to is when someone has a neurological function that is different from the norm. It is atypical in some fashion. By comparison, somebody who is neurotypical is somebody who has neurological function that functions in a typical way. And the reason why this language is important is because it is not about focusing on these things as something that needs to.
So it's what, about 1%. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up to 2% worldwide, and that'd be 1 in 50. But right now it's like 1 in 100, so to speak, or it varies down to like 1 in 49, and who knows. But nonetheless, that's what she's talking about how many people are, quote, neurodivergent. So about 99% of the population would be considered neurotypical, and that's as a neurotypical brain, as opposed to the 1% of us that have neurodivergent brains. Like I said, I think that percentage is probably going to be higher in the end. But nonetheless, there is a distinguished difference in those two brain types, and that's what she's trying to differentiate here.
Be fixed or is bad or wrong in some way. It is about simply accepting that there is a diverse way of interacting with the world, that different people have brains that are built in different ways. And one of them is not good, one of them is not bad, one of them is not wrong, one is not right. It just is the way that it is. And we need to understand that society was generally built to function with neurotypicality in mind. And so, in many ways, neurodiverse people can struggle to fit in with regular society and fit in with certain molds and standards that we have. And when it comes to neurodivergence, this can be for a variety of reasons. It can be because somebody has autism or ADHD or bipolar or BPD, although it is most commonly associated specifically with autism and ADHD, but it can be for many different reasons. And when it comes to neurodivergence, the results of that can mean that somebody maybe has issues with understanding social cues or communication, or understanding nuance in gray areas, or sensory processing, among many other things. I just want to get it out there now that I am not an expert in these things. I am somebody who has had many romantic partners and roommates and play partners and friends who have ADHD or autism or many other things. And I do get insulted when people try to express that people I know and love are wrong or are broken or need to be fixed. And I really, really want to address this with the platform that I do have, because I do think that it is an issue, but I am not an expert. I am simply trying my best to explain with what I know. And so I do encourage you to do your own research. I will have links to people below who are autistic, who have talked about their experiences, people who do have ADHD that talk about their experiences. And I always recommend that you do go to people who have this as part of their lived experience, because
This gal's amazing. How often do you hear this? She's saying, "Go ask." I'm not autistic, basically. Go ask autistic people about this. That is really cool. That's exactly what should be being done.
I cannot give you that. And I think it is important to acknowledge and recognize those experiences. And with these sort of comments, assuming they're in good faith, I think the concern is similar to the broader concern that people seem to have with those who have disabilities or mental illness being part of the BDSM community, which is, can they meaningfully give consent? Can they ask for consent from other people? Do they understand social cues?
And this is the same question you should be asking of anyone. Really.
That sort of thing. Again, assuming it's in good faith, which it probably isn't, but I think people take in biases and prejudices, not always realizing that those thoughts they have are actually coming from a harmful and biased place rather than one of like genuine concern, right? And I don't want to assume that everybody who has these thoughts is doing so because they want to hurt others or because they hate people. It's just ignorance, right? And we're here to help people, hopefully, overcome and address that ignorance, particularly in the framework of somebody thinking, oh, this, people with autism, people have ADHD, whatever, they could be potentially dangerous because of this. And it almost gets compared to like not having any empathy whatsoever and not having any ability to care about other people's emotions at all, which is not what this is about in the slightest. It's almost like autism and psychopathy are the same thing, and they're not. Psychopathy, again, it's not really even a real term that people still use in diagnostic criteria, but the general social understanding of psychopathy is that somebody who has a complete lack or care about other people's emotions. They might recognize this person is hurt or sad or upset with me because of something I did, but I don't care. Or I use it to manipulate people. Whereas people who have autism, people who have Asperger's, etc., it's not necessarily that they are in a place where they don't care about other people's feelings, but rather they don't really understand that kind of communication. They might not pick up on social cues. They might.
It's, I don't experience emotion in the same way. And emotion and thoughts and so forth are not the same thing. I can care about something and not want it to be harmed without having any emotions towards it. Like my father-in-law's lawnmower or something. I don't want that harmed. I care about it. I don't have a huge emotional attachment to it. or nor do I have any emotional thoughts towards it. Really, it's a freaking lawnmower that's not even mine. But I don't want it to come to harm. That's one of his possessions or whatever. So people conflate the two. Neurotypical people do. They conflate the two and do not, because they experience them the same at the same time, they don't recognize that they are two separate things that are simply experienced simultaneously by most people, but not necessarily by all people. So it's not necessarily a not being able to understand or communicate. It's a different understanding and experience of life is what it is.
Might not pick up on facial expressions, and so for them, they might have a situation where they misunderstand something, they don't pick up on a cue right, they don't understand what somebody's facial expressions are trying to tell them. But when somebody says, hey, that thing you did hurt me, it's not that they shut down and go, I don't care. It's, oh, okay, thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, thanks for letting me know. I'll try not to do that next time, or I hope you understand why I did that, because I'm like this. Boom, done.
I didn't pick up on that, and I'm sorry I hurt you. That has been all of my experiences.
And that's just what a good human being does. It sounds like she's a good human being.
With any of my partners, anybody I've ever played with who has Asperger's or autism, that has been the experience. It's not that they are psychopaths with no ability or no care for other human beings. It's just that they don't necessarily pick up on all those social cues in the same way that a neurotypical person can generally.
And my wife knows to be very, 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 very direct and blunt, particularly with anything like that.
Rely on. And I do also just want to make another little quick note here. I am referring to things as like autism and Asperger's because I do know people that were diagnosed with Asperger's specifically that prefer to keep that as the terminology they use for themselves because everything got lumped under one category in the DSM-5, and so some people just still prefer to use the term Asperger's to refer to their own experiences and don't want to use the term autism.
The thing is a lot of people were in fact diagnosed as Asperger's, and that changed in 2014. You can't give out that diagnosis. Supposedly, doctors still do, due to their lack of education. But they will give out that diagnosis even though it doesn't exist. So, people who have been diagnosed by a doctor as Asperger's and they have not been re-diagnosed, they're still Asperger's technically, even though that diagnosis doesn't exist. They will not have autism spectrum disorder until they see another doctor, and that doctor puts that on a piece of paper, and that's just a legal thing. If we're getting down to it.
For themselves, so I'm doing a little and thing to just recognize that different people prefer different labels to refer to themselves, and everything's good. You don't have to educate me in the comments about the DSM-5. I'm aware. Just a little note there. All right, but moving on. Another thing that people are concerned about is one's ability to give consent. And I think I don't really have a great explanation for why people might have this notion other than it is really infantilizing, it is ableist, and it just doesn't really make sense. Like, you can still give consent, like, as long as you're functioning in such a way where you have a rational understanding of the world and you can meaningfully assess risk, the normal things we would want to do for any sort of negotiation in BDSM to make sure that somebody is freely giving their consent. Yep. As long as you can meet that criteria, it's all good. And the adults that are entering in the BDSM community are generally in a place where they can rationally assess their risk profile. They can rationally.
And if the people that you're working with aren't super hyper vigilant about this, then they're not somebody you need to be messing around with. That's all there is to it.
Assess, is this something that I want to do? They are able to give safe words. They are able to establish boundaries.
I our taps or whatever their safe thing is going to be. What a lot of times it's good to give multiple different ways, because like I'll go mute and other people could, I imagine. So then is it 3 taps or 4 taps or what is it your eyes moving, whatever it is.
And so I just think that that one just doesn't hold any water at all. And so what I think I want to do now is move away from talking about people's prejudices and misunderstandings and assumptions and move into talking about why the BDSM community can actually be a positive and healthy thing for people who are neurodiverse. And I think the best thing I can do here is actually just share people's experiences, because I had many people who reached out to me on Twitter. I know many people who are educators in the kink community who are neurodiverse themselves, and I think really, why not? Let's just share some people's experiences of how the BDSM world has been a positive thing for them. So one person said, as someone who was diagnosed with ADHD in 2nd grade, I've always been weird and was not accepted in grade school. The BDSM community has become a home for me this past year. Another person added, kink is great for me because of the super clear.
I think there's so many autistic people that are into and neurodivergent. I think it's like neurodivergent land. And the same thing with cosplay and Rens Fest and all that stuff. That is such. I am so at home at those places. There's so many neurodivergents there. It's like all it is. It's pretty crazy. I love that world. It's something I just got introduced to last year, and hopefully this year I can go.
Here in open communication, which I need as an autistic person. Someone else added, I have Asperger's and it hasn't stopped me one bit. I'm not even sure anyone's noticed. I also know a whole bunch of people with Asperger's, ADHD, etc. within the BDSM community. I know multiple people with Asperger's, autism, and ADHD. Every one of them is perfectly capable of consenting. Heck, some of them are even more stable and knowledgeable than me. And then in response to the specific comment I shared about some people thinking that they can't do BDSM, someone replied, ADHD, autistic, and super kinky person here. That is definitely ableist and very infantilizing. Neurotypical people constantly use our lack of understanding of their norms as a way to deny our adulthood, our independence, our capacity to give and take consent, and our sexuality. And now I also want to highlight a series that Kinky Baron / Baron Von Aaron put on his Instagram page. If you haven't seen that before, I do recommend it. Kinky Baron has done a lot of great work. I think I've actually mostly mentioned their memes for the meme videos, but they also do a lot of great outreach over on Instagram, and they had a whole series back in March that was talking about their experience and just education in general about the intersections of neurodivergence and the BDSM community. They mentioned, my life is also rich and full and wonderful. Not only have these things enriched my understanding of kink, my experience in BDSM has helped me better understand and connect with my neurodivergence. I've met
Okay, this is really important what they're going to say here.
many amazing people in the community who are autistic, bipolar, or otherwise neurodiverse, and it has helped me grow a community. Many neurodiverse.
It's very, very interesting that they were talking about the depression, PTSD, and anxiety. I have heard of people using BDSM, adult sensory play, we'll say, and just for those things, you get through PTSD situations and so forth, and it does help them. But once again, you got to really be with the right community, the right people who all have the right right attitude going into it.
And it has helped me grow a community. Many neurodivergent people are able to thrive in the BDSM world because we are able to rely on consistent social expectations.
There's specific rules that are followed, and we love to follow the rules, so it doesn't matter if we're the dominant or submissive or whatever. We're going to follow those rules because we're autistic, and that means that whatever that person says is no, or whatever is no, and that scene stops or whatever. And autistic people would be very, very good for that, just because of that.
Clearly defined roles, the ability to create a secondary identity focused on our personal identity, focus on specifics and details, and also just that kink is fun. You often find that neurodivergent people are very active in roles around their local dungeons, events, and classes because the social structure allows us to feel comfortable and to thrive. And
Like I said, Renfest, cosplay.
And those are just some of the thoughts that people
Guarantee. Well, in fact, I've been to Renfest, and last time I was in Renfest, totally true. This totally happened. I went and noticed that there are these leather brassieres, and I looked and I was like, that was kind of cool. And then I looked, and there was a whip, but it had a clapper on it. It was really loud, so I'm listening to it and going tap 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 tap, and this lady looks at me and she just smiles and she's like, just come on back with me. And she took me into the back room where they had all kinds of really cool stuff. I saw that and I was like, oh my god, my wife has to see that. So then I went and got my wife and my stepdaughter, and we all uh, toured the various things they had back there. It was really great. But these different groups do cross over for sure.
shared with me. Obviously, again, this is a wide world. There are many different experiences out there. So if you do have your own, I would love it if you would share them down in the comment section below. But all of this just goes to show that the BDSM community can be really enriching for many different people. And when it comes to research and studies about this, the evidence does show that people who have autism are very much a cross section of the general population when it comes to sexual preferences. And so it does make sense that people who have autism, people who have ADHD, etc., would also be part of the BDSM community. And I think it's important that we don't de-sex people who are neurodivergent.
And also, because it can be so STEMmy. It literally, sex can be a STEM, and then, of course, sensory play can be a STEM, and sometimes you can combine them or do them individually, whatever. I've done all different ways.
People who have disabilities, etc., because they are also very much able to have a robust sexual world. They're able to have intimacy with other people just as much as the rest of us. And some of them might be asexual like me. Some of them are not. Some people engage in sexual BDSM, some don't. And really something important to recognize is that for many people, being in the BDSM world is more comfortable than trying to interact in the vanilla one, because we do have such explicit conversations about consent and boundaries. We negotiate constantly.
Literally, and if that does not exist, that's not people you want to be around. It was a constant conversation, and what you like yesterday, you may not like today, or vice versa. You may want more than what you did yesterday. It doesn't matter. That conversation has to go on, and every time we talk safe words, we're talking safety, 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 physically and mentally, for sure. Absolutely mentally. That's the most important part.
We ask before things like touching other people. It can also be great for people who have sensory processing issues. It can be just a generally really healthy environment where things that would typically be shunned or shamed in the vanilla world are kind of allowed to be out. Things are just more comfortable, and so there's just less pressure there, and it can be a place where people are able to build that second home. I've even heard theories that...
And there's a lot of, because people are so open, and this is very private stuff. In these groups, you do not talk outside the groups. I mean, that's pretty much expected. And if there's anybody that works into one of those communities, they're found out real quick, and they don't stay in those communities for very long at all. They're so these communities literally can be very, very safe, and there can be high profile people in these communities that nobody knows about.
Things like bondage can help replicate deep pressure. I know people that happen to hyper-focus while doing rope. I know people that find the explicit rules and structure of a power exchange dynamic to be very comforting and rewarding because they know exactly what the expectations are. They know what the rule book is, essentially, sometimes very literally, when it comes to power exchange. And I don't really know if there's much else here that I can really say other than to just really emphasize that people who are neurodiverse absolutely can be part of the BDSM community. They can be wonderful play partners. They can be amazing volunteers and educators. They can help build our community up. And likewise, being part of the BDSM community can be a really helpful, healthy, fulfilling thing for people who happen to be neurodiverse. The experience experiences are as numerous as there are people in general, and there's no reason at all why we should be taking in biases and ableism into our community and saying that XYZ people can't do BDSM because of just some
This is so totally crazy because she's a neurotypical.
absolutely nonsensical reason. It just does not make sense at all. And if we do want to have a kinky, sex positive, open environment where people are able to be themselves, I think a big part of that is also being open to those that are neurodiverse. So again, if you want to share any of your experiences, any of your thoughts, comments down below, I would love to hear from you guys, especially if you are neurodiverse and you're part of the BDSM community yourself. I would love to know, how has the BDSM community helped you? What do you find draws you to the world?
All right, I'm going to go on to the next one. I don't know what this guy's going to say. I just put in like kink and stuff like that, or sex and autism, just to see what these different people are saying. And I think it's just
Autism and
really
kink.
interesting. I haven't
So
seen
if that's
these.
not what you're looking for, I suggest you go to my personal Facebook page, which is full of photographs of my cats. So back in 2003, I accidentally won a competition
Okay, this guy, I don't know anything about him, but I'm guessing gay in BDSM community. I'm guessing. We'll see.
in America called International Mr. Leather. I've got a picture to prove it. This is me back then, obviously pre-lockdown. Wait.
Okay, I'm guessing I was right.
And winning that meant I had to take a year off work and travel the world being an international sex ambassador. And it threw me headlong into a world of kink and kinky people and kinky conventions. And I absolutely loved it. I yummed it up. But it's only 20 years later, almost 20 years later, that I'm beginning to piece together exactly why kink was so attractive to my autistic mind. So I'm not answering this
autistic.
for any other autistic people. This is purely personal, but these are some of the reasons why it was particularly appealing to me. So first of all, let's talk about distractions. In vanilla gay pubs and clubs, there is always definitely loud music coming from the dance floor. You have to shout to get a drink. I promise you, during the evening, somebody's going to turn on the mirror ball. At some point, a drag queen will come out and start heckling the crowd. There's a lot going on and I can't tune it out. Compare that to your average kink club. Now, you might not have been to one, but let me tell you, yes, there's lighting, but it tends to be static and there's always a white spotlight on each piece of equipment so you can see what you're doing. And there's music, but it's in the background so as not to get in the way. And there is always a set of sofas for you after you've had some kind of, I don't know, bake-off role play. You've been Paul Hollywood, I've been a lump of dough. Afterwards we can sit on a sofa and recover from the experience. It's perfect. And if you need things really quiet, I can recommend anywhere where they practice tying people up with rope. Sometimes they call it shibari. Don't worry, it's just a word like origami, but for people and rope. And the silence there when people concentrate on what they're doing is absolutely delicious. Point 2. Trying to chat people up completely mystifies me. I don't know how to do that in a regular pub or club. I mean, tell me to have an unstructured, natural conversation completely relaxed. It's not going to happen. I like conversations to have a point. Compare that to trying to hook up with somebody inside a kink club. There's negotiation where you discuss your needs, wants, desires and limits. You might go through prior medical history, but the conversation has a point. If you're lucky, there's a questionnaire. If you're too shy to speak verbally, you can always submit things respectfully as a journal entry. I love it. It's almost as if that initial dance between two people was written in a kink club with autistic people in mind. Point number
I've never experienced that, but that's hilarious.
3. People are always wondering how I miss so many social cues in everyday life. But in a kink club, there are visual clues that will help. If somebody walks in carrying a bag of rope, they're probably interested in tying you up. If they walk in with a riding crop or a...
I used to go to like nightclubs and stuff like that. And yeah, they were loud. Then they hurt, but I just figured it hurt everybody. So I just dealt with it.
paddle, they probably want to hit somebody with it. Like, it's really obvious. If somebody's wearing a chain around their neck, they're probably in a relationship. right down to handkerchiefs in back pockets telling you what kind of activity they're into and whether they like to give or receive. Thank you to whoever made it that obvious. Point 4. I'm not a fan of mess. Now, I know there's some kinky stuff you can do that does include, I don't know, chocolate spread. I tended to be at the other end of the spectrum. But trust me, if you are the kind of person that wants to wipe down all the furniture with a solution of mild bleach before you begin, a kinky person's not going to mind. If anything, they're going to thank you for thinking ahead. So looking at the kind of kinks I was drawn to, they were always at the clean end of the spectrum. Point 5. It doesn't matter how clueless you are about kink, it's kind of expected that everybody is when they get in the community. So that's why they have workshops that you can go to as an adult, and you can learn things like the 5 stages of a BDSM scene, which for me would be negotiation, the warm-up, the escalation, immediate aftercare, and checking in at some later date. It's so brilliant. It's like somebody opened up my head and
My wife likes rope, we'll just put it that way.
peeked in to work out what it was that I needed. Thanks for that. 6. I've worked out I like intense sensations on my body because it seems
She likes tying the rope.
to switch my brain off and drop my thoughts into my body. Now, bear in mind, this has to be something that I've asked for. If it's something I haven't asked for, like a dripping tap in the next room, it will absolutely drive me nuts. But looking at all the kind of kink I liked, it tended to be things that gave me an intense sensation on my body that would switch my brain off. And chatting to other autistic people, it seems that quite a few of them like that experience as well. It's why so many of us like sleeping.
It's like checking out. It's called checking out, or what's the other way of putting it? I can't remember what. I don't know why it's not coming to my mind. But yeah, when you basically check out, or you're trying to get to that headspace. That's what they call it, and that's definitely the place I like to go. Headspace, and that goes. There will be a certain amount of pain, and then the adrenaline will kick in, and then it doesn't hurt so much anymore, and then that's when the headspace starts to come and so forth. At least that's how it's worked for me.
Sleeping underneath a weighted blanket. So I look back at all the kinks that I did all those years, and now I just think, was I just looking for a weighted blanket?
Oh, I had about an 8-pound cat that slept on my hip, and I so love that cat. I mean, it slept on my hip for a decade, and I so loved it. And after that, I had to have a weighted blanket, and I didn't even know what they were. My ex-wife found this extremely heavy. It was a bedspread. It might have been a weighted. I don't know. It was heavy, but I would double that over and throw it on top of me. And I had no idea what a weighted blanket was until I found out I was autistic a couple of years ago. But I sure as heck had used one.
If you meet an autistic person who's a little bit kinky, feel free to ask them why. Trust me, they'll be very happy to tell you. You might be there a while. Chances are their reasons will be different to mine because every autistic person is different. Mm-hmm. And if you'd like to chat any of this through with somebody who gets you, feel free to send me a private message or visit my...
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's kind of the point of
Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Katiosaurus. I'm a certified sex educator with a special interest in the intersection of neurodiversity, especially ADHD and autism, and how it fits into sex, relationships, intimacy, and for today's video, kink and BDSM.
Come on.
I'm pretty sure I know she's ADHD. I don't know if she's autistic or not. She might be.
It has been a very long time since I dropped one of these videos, and it's been a very busy few weeks for me here in Katiosaurus land. I have been at DragonCon talking about neurodivergency. I was asked to partner up with Kobold Press and Realmsmith to play a fantastic game of D&D. Then I went to LA, and I did a bunch of meetings. And now I'm back, and I'm very, very tired. So today's video is going to be short. So one of the real truths about transitioning from TikTok to YouTube is TikTok to YouTube is that I'm honestly having a really hard time with it. Because my ADHD brain and my passion that I have for this subject means that my brain goes galaxy brain, and then I put together these like 50-minute videos, and then I go, oh my gosh, nobody wants to watch that. So I'm trying to find a balance between like short form content and talking more in depth in long term.
Yeah, I started out the other way on YouTube, of course, and went to TikTok, and you're basically trying to get a 10-minute video or 20-minute video into like 60 seconds if you can. It's really, really difficult. And then so when you go back, it's like you're so used to cutting it down to almost nothing. You're trying to think of how to keep the audience engaged and still get the point across without boring them.
And that got me thinking about time and how people with ADHD often struggle with time. And that got me thinking about kink and kink safety. And so today's video is going to be on time blindness, kink safety, and ADHD. Now, there has been quite a bit of research done on ADHD and its relationship to time blindness. But before we get into how that relates to kink safety, I want to break down what time blindness is. People with ADHD struggle with conceptualizing time in many different ways. A lot of people with ADHD struggle with knowing how much time is passed. Many people struggle with estimating how long something will take. Many people with ADHD also struggle with just planning for the future, because there's like a here and now, and then there's an over there, and that over there might be tomorrow or in 6 months, but in a lot of cases, it feels the same.
And the thing with TikTok right now is, I don't care who you are or what country it is, you don't use a platform like that to mess with politics. And I don't care if I like what they were trying to do. That's BS. You do not do that. And so I'm having a very big, I'm broadcasting to TikTok right now because I have a decent size, well, I got like 50,000 followers, or 30,000 followers, 34,000, I don't know, something like that. So I got a few followers there, but the thing is you just can't do that on a platform like that and expect to be to continue. And they might be banned from the United States, and if so, it's not really going to hurt my feelings too much. I'll just start somewhere else. But they should not be trying to affect politics one way or another. That's not their business.
Like I said earlier, there's been some really interesting studies done, so if you want to check any of them out, Google Scholar is your friend. Hello, it's Katie from the editing room. You can tell it's the future now because my hair is different. I just wanted to jump in really quick and say that I felt like I didn't do a very good job explaining this, but I didn't want to refilm the whole thing. So I'm going to add this part here. It is important to note that when we talk about ADHD folks being bad at perceiving time, I am talking about a clinical, definable difference in the way that we perceive time. And the research on it is absolutely fascinating. And what we see over and over and over is that people with ADHD, for whatever reason, and they genuinely still don't have a really good idea of why it happens, we are really bad at estimating time.
And it's said that most autistic people are probably also ADHD, but that does not mean that all autistic people are ADHD, or all are ADHD people aren't necessarily all autistic. But most people that are autistic are also autistic ADHD.
In particular, I want to talk about this study, clinical implications of the perception of time in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a review. So basically, this study looked at a bunch of other studies that had been done about ADHD and time blindness, and they came to the following conclusion. Practical approaches to time perception and its evaluation have shown that individuals with ADHD have difficulties in time estimation and discrimination activities, as well as having the feeling that time is passing by without them being able to complete tasks accurately and well. That's a big deal. And if you're new here, you're going to hear
Purple, I think you're time blind to an extent, aren't you?
me say this a lot, but especially when we talk about difficult issues that are associated with ADHD, especially stuff like time blindness, I want to make it really clear that it's not your fault. You're not a bad person for being crappy at telling time. You're not a bad person for not having an accurate internal stopwatch. It is literally part of your ADHD. So now that we've got that cleared up,
Now, when I got diagnosed, I never got a 2-for-1 special before until I got diagnosed with autism. And then I got the surprise, oh, by the way, you're ADHD. I said, what? But that was after, that was a 3-month study. You know, that was the whole shebang on that one. That was a big one. So that's where I got the ADHD. And now that I've studied it, yes, I'm definitely autistic ADHD. The biggest problem for me was trying to differentiate the two, and it took me a very, very long time because so many of those traits cross over, and then each person's an individual, so you've got to take that into account. So for me to really see the ADHD and see what parts are more autistic, I think each person has parts of their brain that more take over than other parts in general. And maybe as an autistic person, we can use certain parts of our brain more often if we want to than other parts to elicit certain uh, outcomes. Like, say you want to shoot well, so you go and practice shooting. I think it's more significant what happens in our brains than other people's brains. And I think if we continue to shoot, or maybe it's doing a pottery or whatever that task is, I think we get better at it than neurotypicals can, because I think our brain kind of changes to that and forms its way. I know this sounds crazy, but I think it is. I think our brain is more plastic or more pliable as to rewiring itself to fit a particular activity. I think a neurotypical's brain, it may be wired just as well, but I don't think it is liable to change itself to the activity that it's doing. I think their brains are a lot more static, a lot more under control. I hope I'm making some sense here at all. But I think there is a very big significance in our brains and how our brains work, because there are certain activities, it doesn't matter what job you give me. In 3 months, I'm going to be doing it as well as anyone else did, probably. And after about a year or so, whatever the job is, I'm going to have twice to 4 times the productivity, half the waste, and half the loss of, like, whatever stuff breaking and all that stuff. It's just how my brain works. But like I said, my brain has to develop that plasticity, that ability to reform to fit those tasks. And I think our brains are more liable to do that than a neurotypical brain. Hopefully there will be studies that will reflect that.
let's go back to our regularly scheduled programming. Past Katie, take it away. That's the stupidest thing I've ever done. I'm sorry. Now, when we talk about kink and kink safety, we often spend a lot of time talking about, the mechanics, the hardware, the negotiation, the boundaries, but we often don't bring time into the conversation. And for people with ADHD or people who play with people with ADHD, introducing time into that discussion can be a great way to keep your partner safe. For instance, let's pretend that you are going to do a scene that involves some heavy impact
I'm
or
still
some
here.
spanking or some suspension. Now, obviously, all of those things come with their own inherent set of risks, and that's something that you know going into any sort of scene like that. However, one thing that can trip up a lot of people with ADHD is the fact that duration needs to be another thing that
Okay, for me, I have to have a clock in the room because it doesn't matter which side of the scene, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to be so concentrated on. I mean, if I'm topping, there's a lot of concentration because you basically got a patient there that you're taking care of. You're submissive, and no, even though you're dominating them, all that, yeah, that's the role you're playing. You're there to take care of them, you know, in that role. So there's a lot of demand there, and then as the sub, you may go to Headspace or whatever else, and basically check out. So there's that. So you got to just really, really
is put
pay
into
attention.
sort of the consideration pile when you're negotiating a scene. If I have trouble estimating how long 15 minutes is and I accidentally go for half an hour, that could cause a lot of issues. Time blindness can also affect.
Yeah, and I always have to have a clock, some way of doing that. And there have been times where I thought we were messing around for 15, 20 minutes, and it was three and a half hours.
How we plan and orchestrate kinky encounters. For instance, someone who's time blind might, think, oh, a suspension will only take me 10, 15 minutes to tie, and then an hour and a half goes by and nobody is having as good of a time as they could be having. Along those same lines, when we talk about time blindness, it can also contribute to frustrations and issues in even planning and putting together kink scenes. For instance, you might decide that you want to try a whole bunch of kinky activities, but realize that you only have time for a couple. Or similarly, maybe you decide you only want to try a couple of things, and then you find yourself with an entire evening's worth of time on your hands. Now, neither of those, having too much time or not enough time, are necessarily a bad thing, but when we talk about building confidence and a surety, especially as, tops or doms, it can be really frustrating to feel like your scenes are never going exactly how you want them because of your issues with time. Time blindness isn't anything to be embarrassed about or ashamed of or feel guilty about. It is a really common experience for people with ADHD, but it is our responsibility to keep ourselves and our partners safe and mitigate and manage those concerns. So how do we do that? Honestly, this one has a lot of really good solutions, and what I really like about it is that you can also incorporate some of these solutions directly into the scene.
I am actually a bit of both, which is very interesting. Definitely a switch.
For example, picking a really sexy song that matches your vibe. If you know that a song is 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 7 minutes or however many minutes long, that can be a great way of keeping track of time without having to interrupt the scene with timers or other methodologies. However, timers are also super valid, and
Yeah, like playing an entire album, it works that way.
in other circumstances, having a big visual timer that your partner can watch, the minutes counting down, that can be really effective if you know how to use it creatively. There's a wink, I'm really bad at it. There are also timers that don't make noise and they just softly light up. This is really creative, but it's one of my favorite ways is using timekeeping candles. They make candles that burn down at a specific rate of speed, so you can literally light a couple of sexy candles and still have a very visual timer for you to check out to make sure that your partner is okay. Now, obviously, none of these solutions are one size fits all, and one person with ADHD might really struggle with time blindness, and for another one, it might not be a big deal.
If I'm top or whatever, I'm really so paying attention to the person that time doesn't matter anyway. And the reason is because I'm paying attention to the breathing, to their heart rate, to their how much they're sweating, everything. Just paying so close attention to them that you know where they're at all times, and how, and you can bring them out or whatever needs to be done.
Feel at all, but it's important to talk about these things, and especially in conversation with kink and BDSM, because there is a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong, and keeping yourself and your partner safe is the most important thing. I'm going to be talking a lot more about the intersection of neurodiversity and kink and BDSM, and also Dungeons and Dragons.
And that's why, like, with that kind of stuff, it doesn't matter if other people are in the room or not, because it just doesn't matter, because you're in your own place. As long as they're not, interfering with what you're doing, you're in your own place. It doesn't matter.
So if you want to learn more about your brain or your partners and ways to really embrace your neurodiversity within the kinky and BDSM spheres, please feel free to subscribe, hit that follow button, and check out my content on all of my other platforms. And also, if you like this spicy kinky content,
Yeah, she's really cool.
This episode of Sexplanations is sponsored by AdamandEve.com. They made it possible for me to talk about sexuality and autism. My name is Lindsay Doe. I'm a clinical sexologist and doctor of human sexuality.
I just have a feeling that she's not autistic, but we're going to go with it.
I'm not a medical doctor. I'm also not an expert on autism or neurodiversity. I am not autistic, but I am an educator, and I've worked hard with people who are autistic.
How did I know? How did I know? That was just like seconds, and I'm like, nope, not autistic. That was kind of almost rude of me, too, I think. Maybe that was rude of me. I'm just like judging her like, like, nope, not autistic.
To make this one episode about sex and autism, which could actually be a whole channel. Almost 2% of the population has autism, a neurological condition.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. I'm guessing it's going to be 2%. It might even get up. That's just an autism, but once you get into neurodivergence, I wouldn't be surprised if we get into 5, even maybe, ooh. Yeah, about 5%, maybe. I think it'd probably be about the high end. I want to say 10, but even with your schizophrenics and Tourette's and everybody else, I don't know. I don't know if you get to 10% or not.
Characterized by atypical communication, social interactions, and behaviors, such as preferring to play alone, difficulty interpreting others' feelings, difficulty navigating social situations, difficulty making eye contact, sensitivity to loud noises and bright lights, sometimes referred to as sensory assaults, repetitive.
Are you kidding me? She's got a white screen, and she's talking about, what did she just say there? Sensory assaults? Come on. Watch this. Sensitivity to loud noises and bright lights with a white screen. Are you kidding me?
Lights, sometimes referred to as sensory assaults. Repetitive.
Yeah, you're damn right. Sensory assaults with a white screen. She has the audacity to say this.
Or stereotyped speech and or movements like echolalia, which is repeating words or short phrases, and toe walking. Autism is also marked by focused attention on specific or
That's funny because my son's best friend, Brando, he's definitely ADHD for sure. There's no doubt about it. I don't think he's autistic, but he was definitely a toe walker, big time. In fact, my wife is the only reason that he was able to walk and go in the military. My ex-wife was an occupational therapist, and I think I just got used to looking at stuff, and I was like, I looked and told her, I was like, look at how he walks, and she didn't. So she went to his mom, and they ended up getting corrective something for him that ended up fixing it for him. So that was good, because his tendons had actually tightened up. There was another girl that we had in our club whose tendons had tightened up. She had a growth issue, though.
Circumscribed interests, attachment to routines to the point of inflexibility, and touch aversion, rejecting hugs, handshakes, cuddling, etc. These characteristics may be unnoticeable or present to varying degrees. That's the spectrum. They may also seem challenging for sex and relationships.
Yeah, I've got all mine in dark mode too, but still, this is so bright. It is so bright. I've got 4 screens. I don't have my 5th one hooked up. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but Yeah, it is so bright. It
relationships,
hurts.
discomfort in social
I
situations,
do
and with
have.
making eye contact, not wanting to be touched, right? Autistics do identify as
Here we
asexual
go.
and lacking in sexual interest more than the general population, but many of them still want sexual activity and or relationships, and they need sexuality and social sexual education to learn how to pleasure and protect themselves. Let's see what I can do. How Lindsay helps the autism community get laid. Imagine your health teacher unrolls a condom over a banana and explains, this is how you put on a condom to prevent the transmission of sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy.
And your autistic kid's gonna be like, how in the hell is putting a condom on a banana gonna keep people from getting pregnant? You know damn good and well that's true.
Later, you and your partner want to have protected sex. You're responsible like that, so you manage to unroll a condom onto a banana and put it by the bedside. Some of you may laugh at this
Yep, you're damn right.
confusion, but if you think about it differently, what actually doesn't make sense about the scenario is why anyone would represent an erect penis with a banana. Why is it socially unacceptable to demonstrate genital health protocol on the genitals? How are we supposed to learn how to put a condom on a penis unless someone shows or explains it without the distraction of fruit? If sexual expression and education is designed for allistic minds, people who don't have autism, then it's going to be difficult for people with autism to understand and engage. Amy Gravano
And that's funny because she was right, because that's exactly where my mind went. It was like, what the hell is this?
an autism sexuality
I sure as shit wouldn't have told my daughter to. You know, she was a farm girl, but I wouldn't have told her to go get a a banana and put a condom on it so she wouldn't get pregnant.
advocate and autistic woman speaks about the need for comprehensive sex education for autistic people. She says when it comes to sex education, autistic individuals are often left out of the conversation. Being disabled is messy, confusing, and sometimes painful, but so is sex, and we need the knowledge and tools to make the same choices as our neurotypical peers. To deny autistic people the opportunity to embrace our sexuality is to deny us a part of the human experience. If we, allistic people, shift a little to be more inclusive, accepting, and compassionate, then autistics experience masturbation, vaginal sex, anal, oral, use of pornography, public displays of affections, fantasy, and kinks equally. And as research shows, they actually assert and fulfill their gender and sexual orientations more. Children with autism are 7 times more likely to be gender variant than neurotypical kids. 1/3 of autistics identify as non-binary. 70% of the general population identifies as heterosexual, whereas 70% of the autistic population doesn't.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct.
70% are ace, bi, pan, homo, not hetero. One hypothesis for this is a higher likelihood of direct communication. Taking things literally is a characteristic of autism, and that can include stating one's preferences, making requests, and following instructions. Another hypothesis is that social constructs like taboos and shame are less influential at blocking the sexual expression and pleasure for some people with autism. Just like the confusion around putting a condom on a banana, why would you make someone feel bad for their attractions or their desires? Yeah, don't.
That's what the church does. And that's what absolutely. Yeah, that's.
Another explanation of sexual success for people with autism is that their brains afford them.
In the United States, that's where what our primary issue with sex and the issues with sex is, and that is it's focused around religion, namely Christianity, that shames us for being human beings. And it's caused a huge problem in not only the autistic community, but in all of the world, but specifically in the United States, in all the Christian communities too. It's been devastating. That's where the more Christianity, the more religious an area is, the more porn, the more prostitution, the more child assault, sexual assaults, etc., etc., etc. And when you get into your very non-religious communities, that number reduces to this lowest numbers.
More black and white thinking, so they're more likely to stop unbeneficial experiences or relationships. You don't like the blowjob, it ends. It's not a good romantic match, say goodbye. This is not the case for everyone, of course. We are taught don't hurt so-and-so's feelings, but choosing to have less experience by waiting or being more selective with partners may mean better experiences. What are sex and relationship challenges? There's still an expectation for autistic people to act more neurotypical if they want sex and relationships like everyone else. Suppressing autistic traits like this is called masking. It can work temporarily, but it's also exhausting. Take, for example, eye contact, which is used by neurotypicals to flirt, release oxytocin, and bond. For an autistic person, Amethyst says, eye contact can be very painful. It's distracting. It immediately scatters your thoughts in 1,000 directions. You're unable to focus on what the person is saying because you're trying really hard to make this kind of arbitrary eye contact. You're trying to mask. Similarly, suppressing one's stims can cause harm. Stimming, short for self-stimulation, can include hand flapping, finger flicking, rocking, swaying, hair twirling, chewing, biting, humming, spinning, and touching one's genitals. There's a long list of stims, few of which are socially acceptable. Even though the socially unacceptable stims feel soothing to the person, relieving stress from overstimulation so that their brains can function, if a person prevents themselves from stimming
I'm kind of surprised she's doing well.
in order to pass as neurotypical, they're satisfying the demands of others to pass at the cost of their need to stim. It's self-defeating and tiring. There's limited energy, limited spoons left to date or fornicate, and if they do manage it, there's usually a fallout because someone was masking who they really are. Sometimes even scripting, using the dialogue and gestures observed in others, seen in movies, shows.
Yeah, Purple, you're absolutely right. Sex and romance aren't necessarily the same at all. My wife is my best friend. She's my sexual partner and so forth. But if we were to have sex with somebody else or whatever, that would just be sex. It would have nothing to do with our relationship or anything else. It'd be like, who do you play chess with?
Or read about in stories to act in more traditional ways rather than as themselves. So all of this feels like a lose-lose situation. The same pseudoscientist and delicensed doctor who proposed vaccines cause autism tried to solve this by prescribing chemical castration to autistic children. The drug Luprin hadn't been clinically tested for this purpose, increased the risk of heart and bone problems, disrupted puberty, entailed bi-weekly shots into the muscle tissue, and cost $5,000 a month. Other so-called treatments include
And that was to cure the autism, to fix it.
electroshock and conversion therapy. No! Let's try this instead. Amethyst, whom I've learned a lot from in my curiosity around sex and autism, suggests guerrilla stimming, just impromptu, unorganized self-care to normalize autistic movements and sounds. Autism is a variation in the brain expression, not something to fear. As allistic people, what we can do is learn more, question our own sexual scripts, like why is it sexy when a masked person leans against a locker? What is it about lip licking? These are just human behaviors that we've given meaning to. And the same can apply to stimming. Stimming doesn't have to become a social sexual signal, but it shouldn't be a turnoff either. Troubleshooting sexuality if you are autistic. If scripting is a part of your autism, find media with dialogues and plots that are consensual. Watch feminist, inclusive shows that model healthy relationships, and pay for ethical porn that models negotiation and reciprocity. If you have a difficult time interpreting tone, ask people you talk to name the tone at the end of their remark or text, like, I'm teasing you, or that was genuine. There's a list of tone tags for this purpose so that you can say, why aren't you in between my legs right now? /NM/SX as a sexual request, giving it a non-mad sexual connotation. Consider BDSM as a community of like-minded people. With some research, you can find members who are consent-focused, adhere to rules, accommodate disabilities, and respect nonverbal communication. BDSM also specializes
And respect your privacy.
in sensation play that allows people to indulge in known controllable sensations or sensory deprivation if you're feeling overstimulated. You can get sexy black earplugs, black eye covers, or full mask to block out smells that might be disruptive. Sleep sacks
I've done all of that deprivation, all of that deprivation.
Or latex rubber vacuum beds can provide constant, consistent pressure, like a weighted blanket without the weight. As S.J. Cottrell puts it, textures can be really challenging, and there are some unusual textures during intimate encounters. Please be patient. Okay, why can I not think about kissing you while...
Yeah, I tell you what, my wife can go mad at a dollar store and can come up with all kinds of stuff.
sitting on this scratchy couch. On Twitter, Polyphilia says, group sex has been more enjoyable as an autistic person than one-on-one sex. If I feel overwhelmed and need to tap out to rest,
Yep, you
everyone
just go.
can continue without
And
me.
nobody cares.
It's so much less pressure that way. An important strategy across the board is to communicate. Even if you don't do it with your mouth parts, try to express what you need and what you're afraid of. Show your limits or ask someone who knows you well to share those with others. Mikhail adds, it takes...
And like, you know, if I was to do a scene or my wife was to do a scene or something that was super, super, super intense, then maybe one of us would not be part of that scene, so that we could watch our partner and just make sure that everything was okay. Or maybe, you know, be part of the scene so that way that they're there to make sure that everything's okay. And this just goes back to, you can do whatever you want to, but just be very, very careful and consenting.
It's a lot of patience. There needs to be trust. But when it works, you'll have...
You got to have a lot more than trust. You have to know, not trust. I don't want to trust. I want to know that person's there and gonna save my life if need be.
One very attentive partner. The Organization for Autism Research has an online guide for
I've trusted people that I shouldn't have. There's a difference in trusting and knowing.
sexuality called Sex Ed for Self-Advocates. It's tailored to autism. It uses really direct language and has complimentary videos. You can also connect with others who have autism and start a sex education group together. Learn with each other about anatomy and physiology, maybe even go on practice dates with one another to get feedback and suggestions. Most importantly, stay curious. Really, if you don't know something, it's usually okay to ask. You deserve to learn, and hopefully you'll find someone who can give you honest answers or point you in the direction of a better resource. I've included some of the resources that have been helpful to me in the description. A big thanks to our sponsor, AdamandEve.com. Adam and Eve is a company that makes and distributes like tiny little dab lube, and you're going to insert that erectile tissue.
Hi
Okay.
everyone, my name's John, and I've had a fair few
Okay, John.
epiphanies about my identity during my lifetime. So the first 20 years of my
only
life,
3
I
minutes.
identified as heterosexual because I was raised in a church environment and there was no other option available to me. And then when I was 22, I met a gay guy and I realized that's what I am. I'm going to identify as gay. And I tried that for the next 10 years. I was...
And for me, basically after I met my wife, story pretty simple. I just was like, why am I necessarily heterosexual? Am I attracted to women or whatever? Why is that? And I just got to thinking about it. I was like, church, religion was the only thing that I could think of, was the only pressure for me to want to be with a woman over a man, so to speak. And then I was like, okay, I'm bi, and I am. I found out for sure. But the thing is I just found out that I like people. So I guess I'm more actually, what is it? I can't think of it. Not bi. Pan.
really, really bad at it. I was terrible gay. I just didn't like gay pubs. I didn't like the mirror balls. I didn't like having to shout for a drink over drag queen entertainment. Someone took me on a gay pride parade and I just hated all the whistles being blown in my ears. I really struggled with a lot of it. And then in my 30s, I won a competition in America called International Mr. Leather. I know, thank you. And part of the prize was taking a year off work, and I...
He's talking about the same thing, so we're going to go to something different.
But an awkward oh, my trousers. Girl, I'm still in my fucking New Year's grind, and I gotta realize that it's not time to wear certain clothes
I
yet.
hope this volume is
You
not
ain't
too
got
low.
down to that way, okay? So, ooh.
Yeah, pansexual is I don't care about presentation. Like I it's human beings. So if someone is trans and it doesn't matter, I don't care about parts and pieces. I care about the person, and I will like at a party or whatever else, whatever. I just let's just play and have fun and not worry about it. I guess is how you would say. Um, but bisexual is specifically I like men, cis women, or whatever. I guess, and pan is I whatever your gender is good with me. Which, um, of course, coming from me, now that I've said it, yeah, I bet that doesn't surprise you one damn bit. Oh my goodness.
But anyhow, I'm but enough for comrade. I welcome you all to subscribe. Queens, peens, and everything in between. So let's get into it. We get time to get into it because, baby, y'all know this
I
bitch
can
be clocking me.
barely hear this
So,
guy.
with that being said, though, I welcome all to subscribe and support me in my. A lot of people with autism. Let me just get into it. Okay, so hyperfixation and fetishes. I believe when it comes to autism, for some people, I'm not saying all, as an autistic gay individual, I have specific kinks, interests, but before I even came out and before I knew that I was gay, these had always been a thing for as far back as I can remember. I'm talking when I was, um, when I, before I learned about a lot of common
See the leg stem there where he's bouncing his leg? That's one of my favorites.
sense stuff,
And
etc.
of course now he stops.
So,
Now he's picking
for
it
an
up on the other leg.
example, I've always been attracted to the idea of no pants day, if you all know what I mean, which is basically, it's a thing that developed more in recent years, but it's mostly goes on in New York and like London, where a massive group of pedestrians will aboard the public transit and and without their trousers, rock out with their junk out in the form of just underwear, panties, thongs, whatever you want to call them, lingerie. It's so hot to me, and I love the idea of just having that level of freedom. Like me, I tend to man spread a lot, and that has helped me in a bit in confidence and being more comfortable with um, exerting more feelings of openness and feeling a bit more confident and important as a person. It's helped me be more approachable. It's helped me feel a tad extroverted as an introverted person. So I love,
So showing off
for
his
as far
mangina
back as I
makes
can
you feel
remember, I've
better.
always been attracted to the idea of just feeling free, being you unapologetically, and just embracing what it is that makes you distinct as a.
Okay, he can show off his mangina all he wants to. That's fine and dandy as long as he's doing it at the appropriate place. I mean, I've been at conventions and so forth where it's totally freaking cool and shit. That if I'm sitting at a restaurant and he's trying to show off his mangina like that, I'm no, it's gonna no, no, no. He probably doesn't. I hope he doesn't.
Person, and just letting just doing that to the best of your ability. And I'd say, like, with underwear at least, there's just this hotness where it's like there's just a thin cloth between you and freedom, and that's where it stops, and you're free to just let that be known that, hey, aside from just feeling attractive in that regard, you're willing to just kind of let that level of comfortability out there in the open and letting people know about that. And that's what I've always kind of loved about it. And for me, I've always just been attracted to the idea of the no pants day, where it's just a bunch
Yeah, the echo's really bad. Yeah. I'm getting
of
bored with this. I think I'm gonna
adults
move
avoiding
on.
the transit stations, or maybe a
I'm
whole day where
I'm
just a
really
lot of
weird
us
about
adults.
the
This is
echoes.
gonna sound probably really,
In
really.
fact, there's a she's a anthropologist and a blonde girl. She does really great videos, but the thing is she sits in an echo chamber like that, and she has a nice voice, but I don't watch her channel at all because it's just horrible to listen to. Yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, you're agreeing with me. You know, there's a time and place for that, and the time and place for that is great. I'm with it. I am there. I am all over the place. But it should be time and place. That's what I think. Let's see. Oh, let's see what else we got. I don't know what this is.
This is gonna sound probably.
This is Orion Kelly. That's the same video. What else?
Have arrived at Sonic. And if you're wondering why we named them that, let me explain. It's so...
What's the connection between
Autism and gender identity? What does the research say? What? Okay, we might have to revisit this with you. Get you on here.
autism and gender identity?
This is my experiment of doing TikTok and YouTube at the same time, and I'm having to do it on two different platforms completely. So I'm having to control everything on both sides at the same time, which is kind of a pain in the butt. But I do want to start doing some lives.
Stay tuned.
I don't know this couple, but
It's no secret that gender has been a big topic in the news lately, especially among policymakers who really, really seem to want to know what's in your pants for some reason. Well, there's a lot of noise about this topic from a neurotypical...
Right, and that all comes from your religious, well, what I used to be, basically your fundamentalist, is where that comes from. Giving a crap about gender. What do they even care? And they never can answer about, you know, the toughest question I ever asked. And I got one guy who tried to answer and basically said, look, I just can't answer. And I thought he was so cool because it was the truth. But I asked, I said, what if I found out that my wife, who had my children, was actually genetically male? So if I divorced, because then I would be having gay sex, but then if I divorced her, it was the mother of my child, right? Or if I divorced him, rather. And he just couldn't answer that. And so what my point was is that, you know, there are people that can be born both, hermaphrodites and so forth, and there are people that are genetically male that can have children. It's extremely rare to be able to have children, but it's actually not too uncommon to be genetically male and be a very beautiful woman.
Perspective, nobody seems to be talking about this through a lens of neurodiversity, and autistic people in particular may have...
I agree. If it is irrelevant what's in your pants. It doesn't matter. I don't care. And now, you know, if we're going to play or something, now that's a whole different story. But even then, I'm probably not going to reject because of parts and pieces. Because they might be fun. I don't know. You know, whatever. We'll just have fun. It's not what that's about.
Have unique perspectives and be disproportionately affected by these conversations. A lot of people have asked us to cover this topic, so that's what we're exploring today. Rather than just talking about our opinions, we're going to focus on the empirical scientific research on the topic. First, I'll give a super short overview of gender identity, then we'll look at some of the evidence that gender expression is different in autistic people and why. Your identity is something that develops throughout your life.
Yeah, definitely. Gender expression. He said it was different. Maybe that's the correct word. But I will say there is much more gender expression with autistic people for sure. I don't know if it's different or if it's the same physiologically speaking or neurologically speaking. I don't know if it's different or not. Um, I do know that it is much more common for us to be non-binary, asexual, anything but heterosexual. Um, 70% of us identify as anything but, or only 30% of us identify as strictly heterosexual. So 70% of us identify as something else. So that's, if you're autistic, you are probably not heterosexual, and just be okay with that because it's okay. That's not how we're built. That's not how we're designed, and that's okay for us. That is what we are, and that's cool. That's what makes us us.
Biological processes unfold over time.
And if we're autistic and we're um, uh, heterosexual, that's cool too. That's how we're built. It's just we're different that way, or we're the same, whatever.
Time, and they're highly variable, and they don't always go the same way. Now that's a feature, not a bug, since the survival of our species depends on
I love the way you put it. It's a feature. That's great. That's perfect. Excellent.
variability within the population. So if we ask what makes you a man or a woman, there are a number of developmental markers that we could look at different times.
Okay, and this is what I'm talking about, Purple. Okay, he's talking about chromosomes. At what point in time, what exact chromosome makes you male or female? You can't really say. Genitals. What makes you male or female? Well, you can have both, so there is no exact dividing line there, so you can't say there. What exact hormonal level do you have to have one way or the other? And then with all the different types of hormones we have, because it isn't just testosterone and estrogen. There's other things involved. What's the exact balance that everyone has to be male or female? And the thing is that's all over the place too. What kind of brain? Is it possible that a brain of a quote female brain could be in a physiologically male body? How do we know? Behaviors like me. I'm actually kind of femme and my presentation and so forth, but does that make me female? Does it make me a femme male? What? So not any one of these things that in this short list here can we identify, and these are major things. Not one of these can we say what is male or female, and there's a big variety within each one. Yet we've got 5 major categories here that are very variant. So it is literally impossible. There is never, ever going to be a possible way to identify a male or female because there's too much involved. That's why gender is so important in people that understand gender. And Purple, I hope I represented that well, because I'm not a trans person, but yeah, I've been around the community a day or so, and hopefully I represented that properly.
Time points, and they don't always give the same answer. Chromosomes, genitals, hormones, brain, behavior. You can think of all of these biological and social inputs going into a mixing board, and gender is the output that comes out the other side. And we could say,
not sex.
People with XY chromosomes are men and XX are women. But there are plenty of cases where someone that has genes on these chromosomes that cause development of male genitals in XX individuals, or
and female genitals that actually were capable of having children. It's not common. Usually most of these people are actually supermodels.
A uterus.
Was I fair in that description of what I said about all the different factors that are involved? I want to be accurate there. I'm just saying, just for a trans person,
Fallopian tube.
In general, and that's not to mention people that have both parts or pieces or whatever. And even then, that is such a very, it can be, there, it's all over the place. It could be anything. Even for a quote hermaphrodite person, it can be all over the place there because we're all individuals. And that's, I think, my point. It's just, it doesn't matter. The human is what's important, and then parts and pieces we can just play with and have fun with later.
In XY individuals, and some people have both XX and XY
Once again, I don't think that probably surprises you to hear that from me.
cells in their body. Hormones vary across individuals and can turn genes on and off, creating differences as well. So are you your body or are you your brain? Your brain continues to develop and change throughout your life, influenced by both your biological development and your experiences in the world. So do we look at your behavior to determine gender? Someone who likes pink and plays with dolls and wears dresses might be a woman, but all of those gendered activities are deemed so through cultural norms. The point is, none of these categorization schemes provide sufficient and necessary criteria for determining someone's gender identity. But I find that if I ask someone, they can...
Exactly, like you're saying, and it doesn't. Not only does it not determine their gender identity, it doesn't determine their gender. All those things could look one way from an outside person's perspective, but the person on the inside could be completely different, and could than what they present or anything else. It
usually tell me what I need to know.
And a lot of that's masking it's in itself.
So what does autism have to do with gender identity? Well, there are a number of possibilities. For one, if gender is a social construct and autism is characterized primarily by atypical social function, then it makes total sense for autistic people to develop atypical gender identity. Also, it's common for autistic individuals to experience things like alexithymia, a difficulty identifying internal states such as emotions or physiological needs like hunger or sleepiness. So asking an autistic person if they feel like a certain gender may be difficult, since the idea that a gender feels any one way in particular is completely foreign.
It doesn't even matter. It doesn't. I mean, yes, I am male or whatever, I'm cis male, but it's not an identity for me. I don't give a shit. I know I'm physically mostly dude or whatever, but it's I just don't fucking care. I just don't. And I just don't care.
For example, Kinnaird and colleagues published a paper in 2019 where they asked a sample of autistic adults who were raised...
Okay, maybe that's what I was saying. I don't feel like a gender. I feel like myself.
...as female to describe their experience of gender. This was a small qualitative study, and they only interviewed 21 people, but all 21 reported that they didn't relate to the typical presentation of female gender. More than a third described themselves as relating to both genders or being fluid, not really wanting to be either gender or enjoying activities of both genders and having a sense of identity based around their interests rather than gender per se. For many participants, having to perform gender was exhausting for them. Another thought that I had about this was that autistic people are often othered and forced to live on the social fringes, which might push them to be more open to questioning the status quo.
And I think a lot of times, like, your goth kids, like I was like a metalhead, these different extreme cultural extremes that we see kids go through, usually in the high school ages or whatever, like what, 14 to 18 or something, those weird ages. But you see these kids go into these social fringes, and I think a lot of autistic people choose that, like the hippie. Well, he's just a hippie. So with that kind of hippie identity, you could kind of fit in because you were expected to be on the fringe. The goth movement, I'm sure, was the same way. Steampunk, whatever. I think even now, like, even though I'm queer, I don't really identify as queer because I don't give a shit. Again, I mean, I'm queer, definitely queer, but it's not like autism is an identity for me. Being queer is just a feature. I don't care. It's not a big deal to me. Um,
Seeing things as they should be rather than as they are. If that's true, then an autistic person would be more likely to entertain the idea that they don't fit in.
right. You know what? And that's something too that Purple. Oh, I've talked about you, and specifically you in some cases that when I met you, I didn't really know. I think it was a kind of a male-ish persona, but I never really did see you, and I never gave a crap. You were just purple to me. And so basically, day you're like, well, I'm coming out, um, as transgender or whatever. And for me, and I say whatever, it's not as in a small thing, but for me, you're just my friend. And so you put on a different shirt one day. For me, that's what it was. You didn't transform from one thing to another. You weren't a freaking transformer. You were you, and you just came out as you. You just dressed the way you dressed one day, and because I know you, it didn't strike me as any damn different because I didn't care. It was just a nice outfit today, and but that's what you're wearing, and it's great. And I don't care because I just care about the person wearing the outfit or whatever. I hope I'm making a damn bit of sense here, but so I've never had my trans friends transform in front of me ever. They just came out as who they are, openly, and I guess visually or whatever. And so for me, it wasn't a real transformation. It was just my friend being more of who they are openly. And I hope you take that in the very best of way. I hope that's. I think you understand because you're just my friend. That's all there is to it. That's all I care about.
Into the typical category, or that the categories are arbitrary and largely unimportant to daily life, and therefore be more likely to non-conform or even opt out of the gender game. Evidence for this idea is currently hard to come by, although there is some mixed research showing that autistic individuals are more resistant to social conformity in certain situations. Some people have even suggested the existence of a gender identity specific to autism called autigender. People who identify this way say it's difficult to separate their gender from their unique autistic understanding of themselves. Currently, this idea has not caught on in...
Hold on a second. I just heard this term just recently. Okay, this is 8 months ago. I've just heard this autigender thing, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell it is. There's one thing that really bugs me about being part of the autistic neurodivergent community, which is part of the queer community, which is part of the trans community. I consider it all one, basically, because we're pretty much mixed all together. We're all involved in more than one way in all the communities. I really want to label people properly as they want to be labeled and so forth. And there's so many labels that come out, I get confused, and I still have a hard time referring to, because of a language factor, and I'm over 50, referring to a friend as they, or them kind of thing, because to me that's rude. That's referring to them almost as an object kind of thing, and our language really isn't built for a new trans or gender neutral speaking. Everything is it's almost like Spanish, not as bad as Spanish, but has a masculine or feminine stress, I guess, whatever you want to call it, and there's nothing in between, and that makes it so hard, because I don't want to call my friends things. That makes me feel sad. It makes me feel really bad.
In the scientific literature, and I couldn't find much research on autigender identities. I'll keep you posted on new developments, but you have to subscribe. There's another way we can approach the question of autism and gender. through another disorder, gender dysphoria. Now, let me be clear, you can have a gender...
Shit, you know, I'm telling you, I kind of, that's what, the which way, I didn't know either. I didn't care. I didn't, never really thought of it. It was just purple. I didn't, it was just, but anyway, yeah, I think you said something about coming out as female, like, oh, okay, cool. And I didn't mean that. Like I said, I'm not trying to minimalize your life, and I know the stresses and everything else. Don't get me wrong, but as my friend, yeah, so what? Whatever, dude. Whatever, dude. Well, I don't care. Whatever. Uh, yeah, you know, they them is kind of. It's so hard for me too. It just I wish I'm getting more used to. I'm trying to, but our language still is. We could do better.
identity that doesn't conform to social norms or differs from the sex assigned to you at birth, and have no dysphoria or any kind of disorder associated with it whatsoever. But because of social pressures, there are many gender nonconforming people who do experience something called gender dysphoria. Now, that's a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity, which causes things like depression or anxiety.
I don't know. You know, I've always been a guy. I've always considered myself a guy. I have parts and pieces, but I've just always been a very feminine guy, and I figured that out and made peace with it when I was like in my 20s. And by making peace with it, I wasn't trying to compete with the macho guys and everything else. So none of the guys, I didn't ever consider any guy to be competition for me, because I always had an in with any gal I was interested in. I just talked to her. And because now I know I'm autistic, because I actually gave a crap and I really cared about them and I was fascinated by them, they were very interested in me. And so it was very, very easy for me to, quote, get the girl, because I actually cared about them and I was interested in them. And they could see that, and for whatever reason, they wanted to share themselves with me, which I appreciated very much so.
That can interfere with daily life. If autism is associated with differences in gender expression, would we see higher rates of gender dysphoria among autistic individuals? Or maybe we might see higher rates of autistic traits in those diagnosed with gender dysphoria? The short answer is yes, but there's some nuance here.
Nuance.
Studies that have looked at clinical patients experiencing gender dysphoria have shown significantly higher autistic traits compared to the general population. Now, it's important to note that autistic traits are not the same as autism spectrum disorder, and some critics have suggested the autistic traits observed could also be brought about through social exclusion, trauma, depression, and things like that, brought about by being gender nonconforming. In a recent meta-analysis of the literature on gender dysphoria and autism, Kalatsunaki and Williams, 2022, combined the results of dozens of studies to see if there was a connection.
No, you got to be really careful when you do that. When you're trying to combine different studies and doing comparisons, those studies were looking at completely different things. And even if the numbers are right, the interpretations of those studies may not be correct. And I've got examples of that. But you got to be really careful with that. I would not trust this, whatever he's going to say at all. And I don't care how careful they were. I just, nope.
Within studies of the general population, they found that people higher in autistic traits reported higher feelings of gender dysphoria, even if they were never clinically diagnosed with either condition. And this finding has been repeated and replicated several times. In studies with autistic individuals, there were studies with both adults and children showing over twice the likelihood of wishing to be the gender opposite the birth-assigned sex. The one study looking specifically at comorbidity of the clinical disorders showed that autistic people were 4 times more likely than a general population to also...
It's so funny because these are just normal conversations in the autistic community. Like all this, nothing here. I don't know, maybe they're coming up with numbers and stuff now, but we've known about this stuff. And it's great somebody's coming up with numbers, but the thing is, this is just a normal autistic conversation going on here.
Also has a gender dysphoria diagnosis, and another study showed that the parents of autistic children reported higher gender variance than non-ASD kids. 2 studies showed rates of
I wonder if you're right, because like with my kids, I didn't care what they if they were gay or not. I didn't care. I think the first time my son asked or told me he kissed somebody or whatever, it was like I didn't know. I had no idea. I was waiting to see. I didn't know.
trans and non-binary identities among diagnosed autistics at just over 15%. That's substantially higher than the general population, currently around 1.6% in the US, 5% for adults under 30. From the other side, patients with gender dysphoria do seem to report higher rates of autism diagnoses as well, but it's a little harder to interpret due to some methodological inconsistency, and the reported numbers are all over the place, ranging from about 3%, which is still higher than the general population, to over 80%. So it's hard to say what the real number is with,
and it's how they ask the questions
with confidence. Overall, the meta-analysis found that there's almost no chance that there isn't a link between autism and gender dysphoria, but more research needs to be done to help us understand the connection. Those are the main lines of research on autism and gender to date. Both of
Let's see what else we got. Oh, this one's gonna be fun. This is my hero. My hero here.
The links between autism, science, and your sex.
What? Is there a link between autism, science, and your sex? Is there a link
This
between...
child might be able to help us answer this question. He has autism, which is a condition where people struggle to socialize.
Do we?
And he's male, and autism affects boys much more often than girls. It's about...
Nope. He's already got that one wrong. Not necessarily. They're just diagnosed more. You should know with that, but of course you don't deal with autistic people, do you? Sir Simon Baron Cohen. He was actually knighted because the Queen of England, I guess, she must have been high that day. That's all I gotta say.
About 4 males to every 1 female. But he's also fascinated by patterns. You can see here he's playing with water, and he's obsessed with the patterns that the tiny water droplets make as he blocks the flow.
He uses the word obsessed instead of extremely interested. He uses a clinical word, like like obsessed is a very negative mental word, as in this child is mentally like has a mental problem. He is so focused on this stuff.
Flow of water with his hands. Scientists also love to discover patterns. So is there a link between autism and scientists? We're going to be looking at...
Yes, there is definitely a link, because like in the United States, if you write the grant just right and you put the word autism in there, you're going to get money. And if you don't put the right wording in there, you're not going to get the money. And most of the wording that you need to put in there has to do with genetic studies and so forth, which is linked to eugenics.
All the links in this special triangle, but let's start with the link between autism and your sex. This is Hans Asperger, and he's a pediatrician who was working in Austria in the 1940s.
This is Simon Baron Cohen, and whatever it is not going to come from the perspective of an autistic. Although he will say some really kind of cool things every once in a while, but deep down inside, you can see that he really has no clue about actually autistic people, and he is considered to be one of the foremost experts in autism.
And wrote one of the earliest accounts of people on the autistic spectrum. He suggested that people with autism might have an extreme of the male mind. So to know if he was correct, we first of all have to have a sense of what's meant by the male mind. One way to reveal the male and female mind is to observe children at play. Girls, on average, play longer with dolls than boys do, and they particularly imagine the thoughts and feelings of their dolls. Boys, on average, prefer to play with constructional toys like Lego than girls do, and also mechanical toys like miniature cars. Children with autism take the male pattern of play to an extreme. This boy, who has autism, is lining up his cars in a very precise sequence. He likes to make patterns. This picture is by a man called Peter Myers. He's an artist with autism, and he loves visual patterns.
Trying to get the volume up
He's
here.
obsessed with the tiny details in his designs. And this is Derek Paravicini. He has...
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there is that gender differentiation. An autistic girl is considered well, she's playing hard to get. She's playing shy and hard to get. Yeah, and if it's a boy, he's just awkward. Yeah, but it is more sexualized with females for sure. Yeah, that's the funny thing, because when I put autism and expert, or professional or whatever, I was just expecting all these people to show up that definitely weren't.
He's both blind and he has autism, and he loves musical patterns. He loves the repetition of a sequence of sounds. He can play any...
So his one example is probably a savant. That's his one example of an autistic person. A savant is what he's going to represent with an autistic person. A savant.
Song that he's heard after just hearing it once. And
yeah, like a 1 in a million. Out of autistic people, like a 1 in a million. And that's the one guy. He wants to show these people as an autistic person.
And despite the fact that he has a mental age of a 4-year-old, he...
Look at that. This is why I hate Simon Baron Cohen so much. This is what he chooses.
He can pick out all the notes in a 10-note chord that he hears.
This is not autism. This is savant syndrome he's talking about, not autism. It's savant syndrome.
Back to your sex.
And that doesn't mean that they are intellectually impaired either. Savants aren't necessarily.
Males, on average, show a stronger interest in patterns, but is this innate? We looked at newborn babies, just 24 hours old.
I did not know that about Legos.
And filmed them for how long they looked at a mechanical object or a human face. What we found was that boys, on average, looked longer at the mechanical object than the human face, and more girls looked longer at the human face than the mechanical object. Given that this was happening at birth, it suggests that this sex difference might be partly innate. Karen Pierce at the University of California at San Diego found that if a child looks for more than 70% of the time at a geometric design rather than a human face, the probability that that child has autism is 100%. So this suggests that a child that shows the
I have never, ever heard that before. Ever.
extreme of the male pattern of interests might also have autism. But where does the interest in patterns come from? We measured the hormone testosterone produced by the fetus in the womb. The hormone testosterone is produced in greater quantities in males, and prenatally it shapes brain development. We then waited for the baby to be born and followed them up in childhood. And what we found was that the higher the child's prenatal testosterone, the stronger their interest in patterns, but also the more autistic traits they showed.
The one thing about the autistic brain is, and this is something that we have discovered, is that the autistic brain in early stages, even after we're born, develops much faster. Well, maybe not much faster, but faster than neurotypical brains. And also, I think in the more primal areas, if you think of it that way, so we have more sensitivities and the pattern recognition and so forth. All of these things, which I call primal, are great for, like, when you're a caveman, recognizing the patterns for game and so forth, or seasons, or fruits, or whatever. Or and the heightened senses and the heightened flight response and so forth, the inventiveness, all these things that are really good for primal survival, I think were autistic traits. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily, but this is just kind of a hypothesis, a guess I have, that autistic people may have, and some, I'm not saying less sophisticated brains by any means, but with more heightened primal senses, which causes our logical thinking, our pattern recognition, and our being on edge, a flight response, heightened senses of awareness and so forth, like those hunter instincts and so forth. Now, it could be that there may have been many, many more of us at one time, and that our populations have decreased, or it could be the same. I don't know. But I think that it really does have something to do with more of a primal brain development. We do know that that certain regions of the brain are that makes us autistic, whatever it is, grows a little bit more earlier. And then our brains slow down, and that's when, what is it, 3, 4, a lot of times they have what they call regression, which I don't think is a regression. I think it's kind of a brain catching up with itself rather than really regressing.
People with autism and typical males are not the only people who love patterns, so do mathematicians. They love the beauty of patterns in numbers. These are the SAT maths test results from the US, and what you can see is that consistently, year by year, males on average are scoring higher on this maths test than females. At the 80th percentile on the SAT maths test, the sex ratio is equal. If you go up to the 90th percentile, there are 1.5 males for every female. And as we go up to the 99th percentile, there are 2 males for every 1 female. And you can take this all the way
Okay, so he's going to start getting misogynistic here. I can see it coming.
to the extreme of mathematical ability and look at the winners of the Fields Medal, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in mathematics, where all 52 of the winners have been male since the medal was introduced some 80 years ago. Now, this could reflect social factors, but equally it may suggest there's a link between your sex and interest in mathematical patterns. But does this extend to interest in science? I work at the University of Cambridge, and these are the statistics, the percentages of males and females studying the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And what you can see is that there are more males, shown in blue, than females, shown in red, in each of these STEM subjects. There are women in these subjects, but they're in a minority.
Okay, where are you trying to go?
Now look at these subjects: medicine, psychology, veterinary science. Here we can see that women, shown in red, outnumber men, shown in blue. I think this is important because it's showing that males and females have equal scientific ability. It's just that women, on average, prefer to study science as applied to people and to animals, rather than science as applied to the inanimate material world or the world of abstract patterns. This gives rise to two predictions about the link between autism and science. First, if autism is an extreme of the typical male brain.
Okay, first of all, you identified a person with savant syndrome as autistic. And that was your example. So you don't even know what an autistic person is. And now you're going to go in and tell us all about the male autistic brain that you have no idea what an autistic person even is.
And if males have a stronger interest in mathematics, then it could be that we'll find a higher rate of autism amongst mathematicians. And that's exactly what we found. Students in mathematics have a higher rate of autism.
Duh. So what?
Compared to students in other subjects. Secondly, if people with autism have a strong interest in patterns, they might even be better at doing science. Again, that's what we found.
Or they might be better at quilting. Or they might be better at farming. Or they might be better at underwater marine biology. Come on, dude.
Teenagers with Asperger's syndrome scored higher on this test of figuring out how a mechanical system works compared to typical teenagers. To be clear, it's not the case that all people...
I tell you what, I've seen pattern recognition from my daughter and my ex-wife as far as spotting game and spotting animals that were sick. It's things you wouldn't even believe. But don't try to make them do math.
People with autism are talented scientists. It's just that as a group, on average, people with autism are scoring higher on tests of scientific aptitude. Back to...
So you designed a test that people that are autistic score a little bit higher on. That's all you've done.
Hans Asperger, he also made a second very interesting observation. He said, for success in science, a dash of autism is essential. So he was also interested in this link between autism.
And here this guy who's supposed to be championing autism is basically championing Hans Asperger, which for the autistic community is a big sore. And right or wrong about Hans Asperger, he's not someone that you want to bring up at any autism anything, not publicly. You just don't do that. But he doesn't know any different. Even though he's supposed to be, he was knighted as supposed to be one of the top experts in autism, and yet he didn't care.
And science.
Didn't know better.
Ian James suggested that these two talented physicists both had autism. Albert Einstein, who discovered relativity.
And I think there's a lot of psychiatrists and so forth that have agreed with that, and historians.
Isaac Newton, who discovered gravity. Einstein...
Not to mention Nikola Tesla, Galileo, etc.
For example, was late to talk and said that he didn't like to socialize. Diagnosing historical figures can be unreliable, so we instead have been looking at living scientists and found that scientists as a group score higher on measures of autistic traits compared to non-scientists. So this is suggesting a link between scientific talent and autism.
No. No.
And this link seems to be genetic because fathers of children with autism are more likely to work in the field of engineering. And this gives rise to our last prediction.
Oh, come on. He's like predicting shit that the autistic community has known forever. Come on. You're not predicting anything. You're stupid. Wow.
Is autism more
He's like trying to act like he has just done something that nobody has ever even thought of before. This is all so old news. Come on.
In places like Silicon Valley, where computer scientists and engineers live and have children. Silicon Valley is a long way away from here, so we went to a Silicon Valley closer to home. Eindhoven is the Silicon Valley of the Netherlands. 30% of the jobs in Eindhoven are in the IT sector, which is twice as high as other cities in Holland. What we found was that the rate of autism in Eindhoven was more than twice as high.
And that's because it's some city of technology. It's like Amsterdam's Silicon Valley.
As in Haarlem or Utrecht, both cities that are not IT hubs. So again, this is suggesting a link between autism
No, it's
and
not, dude. Okay, who are we going to do now? What are we going to do? I don't know this girl. I want to see what
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. So a while back we made a video all about ADHD and how it impacts sex and dating and relationships, and there were a lot of requests in the comments of that video to do a similar video but about autism. Now I am not autistic, but we really wanted to make this video resource for you, and so my assistant Moog and one of the script writers that I work with, Quinn, who are both autistic, worked on this video with me. It's also important to note that, like with ADHD, this is a massive topic and I'm going to try and give as broad an overview as possible, but it's not going to be possible to cover every single nuance. If you're autistic and you don't feel like this video is reflective of your own experiences, that doesn't make your autism any less valid. Even the two autistic people who worked on this video with me both had very different experiences. And before we dive in, I just want to say that while autism does impact people's experiences of sex and dating and relationships, it isn't always necessarily a negative impact.
So she arranges her books by color. See that?
It's just something that's useful to be aware of because different people approach these things differently. So let's get into it. What is autism? Definitions and diagnoses. Autism is a neurodivergence, which means that the way you think about and experience the world is different to most people. Signs of autism in adults include finding it hard to understand what others are thinking or feeling, getting very anxious about social situations, finding it hard to make friends or preferring to be on your own, seeming blunt, rude, or not interested in others without meaning to, finding it hard to say how you feel, taking things very literally, not understanding social rules such as not talking over people. Autism is not an illness or a disease, and there is no need for a cure. There is no agreement within the autistic community about whether or not autism is a disability, and it's considered a spectrum because it is different for every autistic person. Some autistic people may need very high levels of support and care, while others may not. No one is more autistic than anyone else, but everyone's needs are different.
Boy, she's really trying to cover all the bases here.
And there'll be some sections in this video that may not apply to autistic people who require higher levels of support. The word for people who aren't autistic is allistic, and it's really useful to use this kind of language because it helps to normalize that autistic people aren't weird and allistic people aren't normal or the default. Also, autistic people are autistic their whole lives, but some may be diagnosed as children and some as adults. And it's also important to note that not everyone can access or wants or needs a formal diagnosis. Which means it's time to talk about how misogyny is built into science and medicine. Yay! Gender and transness.
Both historically and currently, research into autism focuses on cis white boys and men, and so diagnostic criteria is designed with them in mind. This leads to women, people of marginalized genders, and people of color being less likely to be diagnosed. Young girls
Right. You're right.
and children of marginalized genders are often held to a different standard to boys. We're often expected to be more mature, handle our own and others' emotions at a much earlier age than cis boys, and so autism is often missed or misdiagnosed. While not every autistic person wants or needs a formal diagnosis, it's important that research and conversation
Yeah, I think there's still a double standard as far as your unruly boys versus girls.
About autism become more inclusive of people who aren't white cis boys. Interestingly, research has shown that trans and non-binary adults are between 3 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism. And I actually have an episode of my podcast doing it with Yen Perkis and Dr. Wen Lawson, who co-authored the Autistic Trans Guide to Life. And so I definitely recommend checking that out if you're interested in learning more. Okay, so not every autistic person is a cis white man, but what other myths are there about autism? Myths about autistic people. Autistic people don't have any social skills. Autistic people can't have sex. Autistic people can't fall in love. Autistic people can only have relationships with other autistic people. These are all very, very wrong. The myth that autistic people aren't capable of romantic love is incredibly harmful and hurtful and has been debunked by researchers. Autistic people might...
It's been debunked by researchers. Oh, it's so sad that she has to actually say that, or that she felt like she had to say that. Isn't that sad? And that's for neurotypical people. You know, well, they're not going to ask an autistic person. She's probably very cognizant of this. So she actually has to give lip service and actually say that people had to research it, right? Because, like I said, neurotypical people wouldn't think to go ask autistic people. That would never cross their minds.
Approach sex, dating, and relationships differently to allistic people, but that doesn't mean that they can't do these things if they want to. And one of the things that impacts autistic people's experiences of sex and dating is the assumption that they don't have the agency to do these things. The infantilization of autistic people. Like other
yeah, exactly. And that's why I kind of like getting rude and so forth, or a little crass about sex. Just to let people know that, I mean, yeah, we do. We do. I'm not using certain words because of TikTok there.
Disabled and neurodivergent people, autistic people.
Yeah, we like to. Yep.
Are often infantilized and have choices made for them, even when they do have the capacity to make their own decision. Autistic people are often seen as non-sexual or childlike and innocent, but many autistic people...
And the thing is autism is genetic, so it was passed on some way.
People have and enjoy sex. Another aspect of this infantilization is believing that autistic people can't make their own decisions about their sex life or give meaningful and informed consent. There will be some autistic people who need support in making decisions, but as much as possible, autistic people should be given agency over their own bodies and lives, something which even today often doesn't happen. Just like some autistic people, some allistic people don't have the capacity to give informed consent, but we don't say no allistic people can give consent as a blanket rule. Another issue is how we often speak over autistic people and look to allistic experts for autistic people's experiences of sex, dating, and relationships, rather than looking to autistic people themselves. There are lots of autistic people talking about their experiences of sex and relationships, and there are autistic sex educators. An autistic sex educator that I highly recommend you checking out is Millie Evans, and of course Quinn, who wrote the script for this video. He is a trans and autistic sex writer, and I highly recommend you checking him and his work out. The desexualization of autistic people means that we rarely get to see depictions of what sex and dating and relationships look like for them.
And if it is then it's like Love on the Spectrum or something, where we're definitely infantilized. And I mean, I haven't even watched the show, but I guarantee you that, you know, they don't come out and say, yeah, well, you know, we like to fuck. You know, well, you got a group, sure. You know, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They're not going to show real people. They're going to show their idea of what is cute autistic people and so forth, but they're not going to show that we're human too. That it just doesn't happen.
And the depictions that we get of allistic people aren't always great either. Strict sexual scripts and rigid relationship rules. The dominant sexual scripts and relationship rules are unhelpful for all of us, and this is especially true for people who belong to marginalized groups like autistic people. Sexual scripts in mainstream media and porn give us a formula to follow in sexual interactions. But that formula is often really restrictive, gendered, and cis heteronormative, such as the idea that it should be the man who always initiates sex. We also have a whole bunch of unwritten...
Yeah, it's just, and that's all Christianization. That's all religious BS that this young kid probably isn't really aware of.
Rules around dating and relationships, such as the classic, you have to wait 2 days after a date to text someone back, otherwise you'll...
Yeah, like all that stuff. I don't even, that's BS that I don't even deal with. I've never dealt with that kind of thing. The game playing, it's like if I like the person, I like the person. If I don't, I don't.
Seem too...
But it's not, I don't give a crap about if I'm seeing seeming too forward, or if I'm waiting too long or not waiting. I don't play that bullshit. I just go with what goes.
Keen. To autistic people, navigating sex and dating can feel like everybody has been given this book with all of the rules in it, and you're the only person who hasn't read it. Autistic people may rely on the sexual scripts that they've seen in TV shows and films to understand what to...
I've heard a lot about that, but I've never done that. Sex for me has just been like my humor, and that's really on the fly. I don't tell jokes. I make them up as I go, you know, and because it's all situational. And so I want that person, whoever I'm with, to feel as comfortable as possible. So we're going to go with whatever the situation is. It's like they teach about natural environment training. Well, whenever you look at natural environment training, which is part of ABA, well, they say it's not, but anyway, they never do it in a natural environment. It's always a staged environment. They're saying, oh, look how natural this is. No, it's not. That's why you take kids out, autistic or not, and you take them to the park, and then you learn things, and they scrape their knees, and all these different things that you expose them, but you can do it in an organized way. I mean, you don't do it like after school at 5 o'clock when all the kids are there. Maybe you take them on a day when most of the other kids are at school, so that way it's a little bit quieter and they can explore more or what have you. But yeah.
To do when navigating sex and relationships, which often isn't helpful because those models are very limited. They are filled to the brim with people ignoring other people's boundaries, strict patriarchal gender roles, and just one kind of cis heteronormative sex. This not only might give autistic people the impression that the right way to be in a relationship is to ignore...
I never thought in those terms. I was just trying to figure out that one person. I was really fixated because, you know, I'm PDA autistic, and I was really fixated on that one person, that one girl that I was after or whatever. And really in a truly PDA way, I was fixated on that person. Not in a pathological way of being dangerous or anything, but they were my hyperfocus, I guess you could say. And so I think that's what made it so easy for me to get the girl, because it was genuine. I was genuinely interested in them. And I didn't necessarily care about what they looked like or anything else. Yes, I love to play with the parts and pieces. Don't get me wrong. But I wasn't real picky. I was just very fixated on that person and knowing everything about that person, how they ticked, what made them who they were. And if they like chess, then I was interested not in chess, and it wasn't like I was interested in it to please them or make them happy. No, I was interested in what is it about chess that this person likes. What is it that about this person that makes them tick, that makes them like chess, and how does that apply to other things, that kind of thing. So I would become very interested in chess, maybe, to try to figure out both, you know, how they interacted, that kind of
or somebody's boundaries to show your love for them, but also that they should let other people ignore their own boundaries. Something that Moog said is that they often look at cis, straight, allistic people trying to date each other and have sex without actually talking about what they want, just like, what are you doing? Because no one seems to be enjoying it. We're not going to be able to eliminate all of these sexual and social scripts, but sex education is, or at least should be, a place where we can learn to question them and break them down. Sex education is failing autistic people. Autistic people are often denied the same limited sex education that abled people get.
That is actually very true. And a lot of that is actually motivated. It's really weird. In the Brits, they will deny autistic people sex ed, thinking somehow that that's going to keep autistic people from having sex. And of course, we all have sex anyway, and so they end up having more illegitimate kids and so forth because of it. It's really horrible. In the United States, they try to do the same thing. I'm sure it actually passes in the South in certain places, but yeah, that's a real problem. It really is.
Based on the assumption that they won't have sex and so therefore don't need it. And even when
they don't want them to have sex,
do get access to sex ed, it often isn't inclusive of them. It's so common for us to use language like down there and expect everyone to know what we're talking about, but it's important to be specific. Do you mean the vulva, the vagina, the anus, your knees? An autistic person might struggle to understand what they're supposed to infer without more context or information. And while we're moving towards better sex education in schools, there's still a lot of shame and awkwardness in sex ed classes, and teachers may not be comfortable or experienced themselves in teaching sex ed. An autistic person who might not be aware that sex is a topic that you're not supposed to talk about might be...
Oh, I know, and it's so crazy. You never, ever know. I never could figure that out. Like, people would talk about sex at work or whatever, and I would be like, what the hell? I would be freaking out on it, and then I'd say something completely innocuous, and everybody's like, oh my God.
Curious and openly ask questions, which is great, by the way, but because of these bullshit scripts, they might end up getting teased by classmates or even shamed by an embarrassed teacher. An example of this is the character Lily in the Netflix show Sex Education, who isn't explicitly autistic, but many people think that she is written as autistic. She is very open about wanting sex, and she's seen as weird because she can ask for what she wants. So sex education that is inclusive of autistic people might look like using the...
And it should be fine. People should be able to do that. And nobody should be shamed. But I want to say it in particular women, because women are shamed, and well, men aren't, for just blatantly saying I want to get some, and there's nothing wrong with that. They should be able to do that.
The anatomically correct names for body parts rather than slang. Ensure any videos that are used have subtitles for folks who may have an auditory processing disorder. Not making assumptions about who can and can't have sex. Conversations about consent and how to say no and set boundaries. And discussions of ways to have sex that aren't just penis in vagina penetration. Because if we're told that sex is PIV, then autistic people might take that literally and think that that is the only way to have sex, even if it's something that they don't want. Everyone would benefit from talking more explicitly about consent, not just autistic people. And many autistic people do approach conversations about sex with a lot less shame. Explicit communication and consent.
Autistic people, yeah, but even if you're raised like I was in a fundamentalist cult, yeah, there's a lot of shame, a lot of shame.
People are often very direct and prefer things to be said out loud and clearly rather than inferred by...
Well, you know, nobody ever saw, the gals never saw it as a creepy obsession, because I never let them see that. They just saw that I was interested in them and that it was genuine. I still, you know, did my own things or whatever, but they saw that I really did care about them, and I think they found that very attractive. They weren't used to seeing that, and they were used to guys that were basically just trying to get them some, and I just didn't have to try.
By context. When it comes to sex, they might prefer for consent to be very explicit and verbal. For example, an autistic person might struggle to read the signals another person is giving them of leaning in and wanting to be kissed. Or they might want to check in and ask for consent every time they do something that allistic people in relationships often take as a given, like kissing. For some autistic people, this comes from a sense of not understanding the rules of a society designed for allistic people and wanting to be extra.
And there were so many times where I look back on it and gals were so trying to drop hints, and I totally missed it. So many times that I didn't get it, and I should have. And I at the time, I think I was even looking. I just didn't know what I was looking at. It was pretty sad.
Careful around things like sex so that they're not breaking any of these often unwritten rules. Because of all of this, there are a lot of autistic people who really enjoy BDSM, which has explicit consent and negotiations built into it with things like safe words and check-ins. Autistic.
Yes, it's amazing. You know exactly, and you can decide exactly what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. Exactly what's going to happen, depending on who you get with and to the level. I mean, you're not going to jump into the highest level stuff immediately, but yeah, pretty much whatever you want to happen can happen.
People often prefer direct communication rather than uncertainty, and so they might ask questions that we are taught are needy, such as, do you like me, or do you want to be in a relationship with me? Which, in my opinion, are really great questions to ask. I talk all of the time.
It's just very blunt, yeah. It's just very, very blunt, very straightforward.
About how important communication is, and the direct communication about wants and needs and boundaries and feelings that autistic people often prefer is an amazing way to build a healthy relationship. Another thing is that autistic people are often taught that their needs are unreasonable and they struggle to say no. Not because they don't understand consent, but because they don't feel like a small amount of discomfort is something that they're allowed.
And I miss guys too. I definitely miss guys. Like, I mean, there were some times when I was like, because I put off the wrong vibe or whatever, and these guys, you know, are kind of like hitting on me and stuff, and I just was finally like, no, dude, I'm straight. You know, you're cool. Dude, hang out with you all day. You know, but I'm straight. You know, that was when I was younger. Now I don't know. Who knows? Who knows nowadays? Could be a whole different story.
To make a fuss over, or because they've been told that they are difficult.
And no, I am very, very married, don't get me wrong.
For setting boundaries. For example, the expectation to hug or kiss or shake hands when you meet someone might be intensely uncomfortable for an autistic person who struggles with casual touch. The expectation that we should engage in physical touch even when we're not comfortable with it is one that we are taught right from when we're little kids. And there's a really simple solution to this. You can just ask. And it doesn't have to be a super formal.
I'm trying to pick up her accent, and she sounds pretty American, but I don't think she is. I don't know.
Thing. Recently, when I met Quinn in person for the first time since we started working together, I asked him if he was a hugger or not before we
Yeah, she's not American.
Hugged. While autistic people prefer direct communication, social situations are governed.
Sounds like a type of English?
By allistic communication styles, making them difficult to navigate for autistic people.
It's not London. It's not Welsh accent.
Cues, tones, and context. Autistic people can struggle with picking up tones, especially when communicating by text when there are no other contextual clues. They might not notice or be able to interpret social cues, and sometimes it can feel like allistic people are speaking an entirely different language. Written tone tags like /s to indicate sarcasm that are often used in online forums and social media platforms can be really useful. Autistic people are often told that they're being rude or sarcastic when they're asking genuine questions or just sharing their opinions. Because of this, many autistic people feel like they can't trust their own interpretations of other people's tones or intentions. This means that they might find it really hard to tell if someone is flirting with them or even if someone is angry with them. All of this can lead to confusion and conflict in relationships because we're supposed to be able to tell when our partner is upset or when they're trying to initiate sex. It can be really helpful to specify what tone you're trying to convey, even if you're having an in-person conversation, and not just if you're dating an autistic person. Autistic people aren't the only people who benefit from the implicit being made explicit, and it can be really sexy to hear somebody saying, Oh, and by the way, this is me trying to flirt with you. And speaking of flirting, fidgeting, focus, and flirting. Eye contact is a big part of how allistic people flirt and show that they are confident and comfortable around another person. And for allistic people, this is mostly done subconsciously, but eye contact can be incredibly uncomfortable for autistic people. Imagine the scenes that we're taught are really romantic, like eye gazing on a date or staring intensely into
Yeah, I don't know. Not on a date or whatever. I don't know about all that, but I can look in my wife's eyes real easy, and I can look in my daughter's eyes. I used to be able to look in my son's.
to each other's eyes during missionary sex. These could be an absolute
not during sex. That would be really awkward.
Worst nightmare scenario for autistic people. And to help them, autistic people often engage in self-stimulatory behavior, which is more commonly referred to as stimming. Stimming usually involves repetitive movements or sounds, and it isn't unique to autistic people. But it might be more obvious in them, as it's an important way that autistic people self-regulate to stay grounded in the moment or regulate their feelings. There is a huge amount of stigma associated with stimming, and it is often read by allistic to allistic people and have increased sensitivities to them. Smells, noises, and textures that allistic people might not even notice might be the only thing that an autistic person can focus on, and it might be really distressing to them. Lots of traditional date venues like...
And sometimes with BDSM or whatever, getting the right sense and the right temperatures, the right amount of airflow, whatever, can also be just as good. Or
bars and restaurants and clubs can be a sensory nightmare for autistic people. And some autistic people are uncomfortable with casual touch, but that doesn't mean that they don't want or enjoy sex.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And I'm definitely one of those that, I don't necessarily like casual touch, but I may like all kinds of touches and fun touches, so it can be kind of both ways.
Although sex brings a whole bunch of different sensory situations with it. Lots of various fluids, smells, and sounds that can potentially be very overwhelming for an autistic person. And something that is really important to communicate with your partners about is what happens during sensory overwhelm. Sensory overwhelm and meltdowns. Autistic meltdowns are a response to sensory overwhelm, and while they're often characterized as autistic people being difficult or throwing a temper tantrum, they're a result of too intense sensory input for an extended period of time, and often needs being unmet. During sensory overwhelm, anxiety levels spike, and an autistic person may seem on the verge of a panic attack. Some autistic people go nonverbal when they're overwhelmed, even if it's the kind of good overwhelm that can happen during sex. It's really important to discuss what you'll do if a meltdown occurs during a date or sex, or even an argument. Building healthy relationships requires trust, which means that autistic people need to feel that they can be vulnerable around their partners and not be judged for their response to sensory overwhelm or any other needs. Masking expectations and autistic needs. Masking involves suppressing certain behaviors that autistic people find soothing, but that others think are weird, such as stimming. There's loads of pressure on autistic people to act the same as allistic people because our society sees neurotypical abled people as the norm. Many autistic people are shamed into suppressing behaviors that help them and internalize ideas that they have to change and, massive air quotes here, be normal to be worthy of love. When you've been told both explicitly and implicitly that you have to hide who you are, it can be really difficult to show up as your authentic.
And that's something that I definitely was expected to do when I was a kid, was hide my traits.
Self in relationships. Discussing these needs so everyone is on the same page is so important because autistic people deserve relationships where their needs are recognized and they can show up as their full selves. Now, because I'm allistic, I wanted to make sure that this video included the voices of autistic people, so I asked on my Instagram for your experiences of sex and relationships. So let's go. Asking, are you okay during sex 100 times because I have trouble reading facial expressions. I also need more alone time than most allistics. People can be bothered by that. Being perceived as defensive, argumentative when I'm just trying to understand something. Hard to differentiate platonic versus romantic, especially being bi. I think it helps me communicate about it better because of my bluntness. It's hard because I really cannot casually date someone. Being told,
that's interesting. I cannot casually date someone. So basically they're going to be all in or what have you. And I could see that from an autistic person too.
You have changed so much when really I've just become comfy unmasking. I also find that I find myself clicking with certain people and delve into very deep relationship very quickly.
That can happen.
I found I was drawn to other autistic people when dating, as we seemed to click more.
Yep.
Communication differences, like not always understanding when your partner is in the mood for sex. A lot of communication needed. It's hard to know what feels right/good for my partner. My need for predictability can feel like control to partners. Have had to work on that a lot. A lot of